If you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description.
Welcome to Mindshock. You are listening to the Maura Murray series. This is episode 77, Bill Rausch 6. This is our 6th episode covering Bill Rausch, and we'll be looking at Bill Rausch's Alibi, FBI issues, Red Cross issues, re-examining his movements, his claims, his testimonies regarding flights, calls, anything and everything involving Maura Murray. We will be going over some new information, new theories, in typical Mindshock fashion. I am, of course, your host, Bruce McGuire, and if you'd like to support the podcast, help Mindshock get more mind-shocking content out there, not just in this missing persons cold case, but in other cases as well, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell for notifications. If you want to support the channel, you could also become a YouTube member for exclusive access to members-only streams and chats. Like and share the podcast, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcaster requests. You could also be a guest in the podcast depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comments section. So, let's look at Bill Rausch and the FBI. I'm going to start off with a post by a very astute researcher on, of course, the Maura Murray Mindshock subreddit. It's interesting to note that the FBI only gets involved with a missing adult if asked by local or state police per federal guidelines. Everyone, including Fred, has relentlessly asked to have them step in, but they are not allowed without strict permission. There are alternatives such as kidnapping, a body across state lines, law enforcement involvement, a young child involved, but typically it's up to law enforcement to ask for help. It's been suggested at first that they did ask for some help, then refused afterwards, furthermore, ? However, an odd statement made by Billy Rausch himself, and below here are his words. Rausch: as for the FBI, New Hampshire State Police also refused to ask them for help after receiving a tip Maura was seen at a gas station off of an exit north on I-91 in Vermont. My father and I drove there to investigate, and the woman who called in the tip had left work and we were unable to interview her. At this point, we had already met several neighbors near the accident scene who had not spoken with police, so we were conducting our own interviews and then sharing them with law enforcement. I mean, has this ever happened before? A DUI walk-away where family members, friends of the family are going around interviewing neighbors? I mean, I don't know what to make of this. We returned to ask New Hampshire State Police to invite the FBI into the investigation given the tip coming from Vermont. They refused. After we contacted a family friend at the FBI in the Midwest who contacted his counterpart in Northeast, which generated an offer from the FBI to New Hampshire State Police for assistance, New Hampshire State Police refused. So that was Rausch's statement. Assuming this is all true, how is it that the FBI did initiate contact with family or friends very early on to do interviews, yet wasn't able to go further because they were not officially asked to do so? Then why didn't the family friend in Ohio let the Rausch family friend know their policy on this? And how is it that their FBI contact didn't relay with the FBI agents who were already interviewing certain people around UMass? Something seems disjointed here. Now, for those that are not aware, or those claiming that the FBI was never involved, quite a few articles reference FBI involvement, including the Whitman-Hanson Express. This was published January 14, 2016. Petition seeks action on Murray mystery. Petition seeks action on Murray mystery using change.org. February 9, 2004, Hanson native Maura Murray, then 21, disappeared after a car accident on a remote stretch of Route 112 in Haverhill, New Hampshire. Almost 12 years later, Private Eye John E. Smith of Truth Seekers Investigations in Bethlehem, New Hampshire, has launched a Change.org petition to ask the FBI to actively enter the case. "We're trying to keep Maura's story in the light," Smith said. "We're not looking for anyone to be on our side. We just want what we're trying to do put out there." Smith, a retired Littleton, New Hampshire police officer who lives about 15 miles from the scene of Maura's accident, has been working with the Murray family for nearly 12 years. The FBI, meanwhile, maintains it is already aiding in the investigation. Quote, "The FBI is assisting New Hampshire State Police, and we're going to defer to them as they are the lead agency," end quote. Spokesman Kristen Cetera of the Boston FBI office said in a prepared statement this week. "Due to the fact that this is an ongoing investigation, we have to decline further comment." So, interesting. DUI walkaway being investigated by the FBI as of January 2016. Unclear how long they've been involved. As of press time, a spokesman for the New Hampshire State Police has not returned calls for comment. Okay. A father's plan. Fred Murray described his daughter as one who never gave her parents any trouble in her life. Initially interested in a military career, she later determined it did not suit her personality and transferred to UMass Amherst mid-year to study nursing. "We just want her back," Fred said on the podcast. "I need help and I'm so totally frustrated. It's my daughter. I can't go away. I've got to find her." He said his daughter's car was malfunctioning and due to be replaced within a week. At about 7 p.m. on the night Maura disappeared, she evidently veered off the road on a curve near a farm, a review of case information on the Change.org petition states. A witness calling 911 reported hearing a vehicle accelerating and then a thud. It was determined her car had spun out of control and hit a tree, but Maura was nowhere to be found, if she was even up there in the first place, of course. Accident reconstruction later determined no trees were hit by her black 96 Saturn and that the damage to the car was likely caused by a solid stationary object or a solid object at the same height as the damage to the car. A rag was also found stuffed into the tailpipe, according to the write-up. The only thing that the FBI ever did in late 2004, they went to Hanson, Massachusetts, and talked to Maura's high school friends. Smith said last week, "We're not sure what that had to do with the whole investigation because none of her high school friends were her college friends." Wow, I actually didn't even know that. Huh. So John Smith can clarify here. So he's claiming that the FBI in late 2004 went to Hanson and talked to Maura's high school friends because they also went to UMass and gave a talking to people there. We'll get into that in a moment. That was one of the questions on which the FBI deferred comment. So they didn't confirm or deny. They spoke to Maura's high school friends. "I think the only way it can be solved is if we have, hopefully, an unbiased FBI that will step in here," Smith said. I like how he put in the word unbiased. "We're not sure what happened. We have several different theories." He said she could have just walked away. She could have been picked up by someone at the scene and taken far away and murdered or something. Smith said there have been a lot of inconsistencies with police reports over the years, including conflicting ID numbers of responding cruisers and a lack of timely investigation to the east of the crash site. I mean, and those are all understatements. We're even looking into the possibility that there's some type of police involvement or some type of cover-up on the part of the locals because someone important might have been involved, he said. Wow! Is John Smith referencing He Who Shall Not Be Named here? He said New Hampshire authorities have had to ask for help and that he was told they felt the assistance was not needed. Questions. Smith said that is one of the questions surrounding the case that has never been answered and hopes signatures on the online petition will generate answers and a full-scale FBI investigation into a case involving Maura's movements through 3 states, or alleged movements. We actually have 3 states involved because she lived in Massachusetts, she drove through Vermont, and she ended up in New Hampshire, he said. Now, with as long as this case has been going on, there's just so many inaccuracies and inconsistencies that have followed this case for years that just made no sense and made it harder to investigate for all of us involved. End quote. So, yeah, and one has to ask, is that by design? People who do not want this solved. So let's go back in time to February 20th, 2004, just mere weeks after she went missing, for the closest information regarding FBI investigation. Boston Globe, February 20th, 2004, by Peter DeMarco. With no new leads, FBI joins search for missing student. The FBI has joined in the search for missing college student Maura Murray, but without a single lead in the nearly 2-week-old case. New Hampshire authorities said the additional investigators might not make a difference. Wow, holy, whoa. This article, the New Hampshire authorities said the additional investigators might not make a difference, so that's their comment? That the FBI is joining the search and New Hampshire authorities are saying, oh yeah, that's not going to make a difference with the extra people from the FBI. Is that curious? Is that because they know something? This is crazy. This is a Boston Globe article. Wow. Okay, continuing on here. Murray, a 21-year-old Hanson native and nursing student at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, vanished the night of February 9th after crashing a car into a snowbank on a rural road in Woodsville, New Hampshire. Police in helicopters and with dogs searched the area for a second time today, but with no evidence that Murray fled into the woods. Her family and authorities believe she either hitched a ride and is on her own or was abducted. Missing persons cases are typically handled by local and state authorities unless a federal crime has been committed. So far, investigators have found no evidence that Murray was kidnapped or taken across state lines. Nevertheless, at the urging of Murray's father, Fred, New Hampshire State Police are now working with Boston-based FBI agents on the case, officials said. So, I'm going to finish the article here, but we're getting a lot of conflicting information from Bill Rausch, from Fred, from New Hampshire State Police. Everyone's saying that the FBI was not involved. In this article, supposedly the FBI were involved right away. But continuing on here, though police have questioned many of Murray's family members and friends, FBI agents will probably return to UMass Amherst and Hanson for further interviews and background checks, said Lieutenant John Scarinza, commander of State Police Troop F. So Scarinza here is admitting that the FBI were on the ground. They interviewed friends and whomever else at UMass Amherst and Hanson. So 2 locations in Massachusetts. We're now at the phase where we need to learn more about the week before Maura headed north, he said. If any friends or associates or classmates had any discussions with her about her wanting to come up north or places she'd like to visit or important destinations, would like to hear from them, maybe that would help us understand where she went or why. Hours before she departed for New Hampshire on February 9th, Murray emailed a professor and her part-time campus job to say she was heading home for the week because of a death in the family, according to school officials and the Massachusetts Daily Collegian, a student newspaper. Withdrawing $280 from an ATM, she loaded her Saturn with clothing, a book, and a stuffed toy monkey and headed to New Hampshire, where she had frequently hiked with her father. She told no one of her plans. Of course, this is all alleged. Of course, there's no evidence of any of that. About 7 that evening, she lost control on a sharp bend on Route 112 in Woodsville. Unhurt but appearing to be intoxicated, she refused help from a motorist who offered assistance and was gone when police reached her car about 10 minutes later, officials said. How would officials know if she was hurt or not if there were no EMTs to examine her? She appeared to be intoxicated. How is that? That could be appearance of a head injury. How would an untrained individual know the difference? Fearing that Murray may have been taken across state lines and unaware of any major issues she might have been struggling with, her family urged the FBI to get involved. Woodsville is about 5 miles from the Vermont border and a 2-hour drive from New York, Maine, and Canada. Fred Murray, who is scheduled to appear on ABC TV's Good Morning America today to discuss his daughter's disappearance, said the FBI involvement is a good start, but not enough. They're saying the FBI is in, but that's a very limited scale, he said. I'd like to see the best case scenario, agents crawling all over the place up here. Scarinza said investigators, including detectives at UMass Amherst, share Murray's concerns. At the same time, he cautioned that people sometimes escape to the White Mountains without telling their family or friends. She's an adult. If you want to go on vacation for a few weeks, you have the right to do that. But even the FBI is not going to go to California to see if she's on vacation there, he said. Man, that's cold. That is ice cold from Scarinza. I mean, there's a way to say that in a nicer fashion. Like maybe there's no evidence of a crime. We were not sure. We're still investigating. I mean, that's just ice cold. Hopefully by the close of today, we will have talked to everyone at least twice within a reasonable radius of the area. We're talking 5 miles, give or take, he continued. There's no evidence of a struggle near or around the car. No witnesses says there was an altercation. No evidence that any criminal offense has happened to her. Yes, she's missing. It's frustrating for the family, and law enforcement officials are frustrated too. We have no idea where she is. And apparently he's not going around interviewing neighbors, because friends of the Rausch family are the ones doing these interviews from neighbors who say they've never heard the police and the police never came to talk to them. Quite curious, Mr. Scarinza. Quite curious. But here we have from the Boston Globe definitive information that the FBI was on the ground at UMass and Hanson interviewing people who knew Maura Murray. Very, very interesting. All right, some follow-up posts. Actually, let's go over the new information from the FBI. So this is January 17th by Samantha O'Connor, westernmassnews.com. FBI issues VICAP alert for the unsolved 2004 disappearance of Maura Murray. The FBI has issued a violent crime apprehension program alert profile on Maura Murray, the 21-year-old UMass Amherst student that went missing from Haverhill, New Hampshire in 2004. Maura's sister, Julie Murray, shared on Twitter Sunday that law enforcement reached out to the family to let them know that they would be releasing Maura's VICAP profile. The post read, "As we approach the 18th anniversary of Maura's disappearance, law enforcement notified my family they were releasing an FBI VICAP profile. The goal is for multiple agencies and jurisdictions to pool and cross-reference info. Long overdue, but a positive step in finding answers. Hashtag Maura Murray." Murray, a UMass Amherst nursing student, went missing February 9, 2004 after a car got stuck on Route 112 in Haverhill, New Hampshire. It is unclear why Murray traveled from UMass to New Hampshire, as she did not share her travel plans with family or friends, or if she even did so. She has not been seen or heard from since the crash, nor was she present at the scene, according to police. The alert will allow Murray's profile to be entered into the FBI database in order for law enforcement to access and share case information amongst different agencies and jurisdictions. So here's another interesting article. Actually, Oxygen.com also referenced this, which is interesting. So the FBI profile states here, Monday, February 9th, approximately 7:03 p.m., a black-colored Saturn four-door sedan vehicle belonging to 21-year-old Maura Murray traveled off Route 112 in Haverhill, New Hampshire, and became stuck. The roads in that area of northern New Hampshire were snow-covered at the time. Other sources say they were not. Murray was not present at the crash scene when police arrived and has not been seen or heard from since. Murray was last seen on surveillance footage earlier in the day at an ATM wearing a dark jacket and jeans. So that was when she was last seen. So they are not stating she was last seen by Butch Atwood, an unreliable or the least reliable party in this whole case. Now, he might be telling the truth, but he's the least reliable with the most conflict of interest. And even if he was very reliable, humans are still humans. So the FBI VICAP alert here is stating she was last seen on surveillance footage earlier in the day. So that would be in the UMass area. That would not be anywhere in New Hampshire. So here's another interesting article from ManchesterInkLink.com. Last week's FBI alert in the Maura Murray case came at the request of the New Hampshire Attorney General's office. This is Monday, January 24th, 2022, by Maureen Milliken. It was at the request of the New Hampshire Office of Attorney General that Maura Murray, a University of UMass student who's been missing since 2004, was added to the FBI VICAP registry last week. The FBI Violent Criminal Apprehension Profile's purpose is to share information with law enforcement across the country to track and apprehend violent serial offenders, according to the U.S. Department of Justice. Local law enforcement can request that missing people, among other potential victims, be added to the base. VICAP is simply another investigative avenue being used in the case, New Hampshire Senior Assistant Attorney General Jeffrey Strelzin told Manchester Inklink. Like all investigative avenues, the hope is that it may lead to useful information in the case. Murray's family was notified by a victim witness advocate of the AG's office last week, Strelzin said. Okay, so that's curious. Continuing on here, Julie Murray, who publicly represents the family, said in television interviews last week that when she was notified about the VICAP alert, she wasn't told why the alert was issued. Now, nearly 18 years after her sister disappeared. I hope it's because there's new information, she said in a News Nation interview. But I think it's because law enforcement has exhausted all their resources that they have available, and this is a very powerful database that they can use to track and correlate information. The purpose of VICAP is to largely help find people who may be victims of a crime, as well as find patterns that will lead to nailing down serial criminals. The U.S. Department of Justice website explains that crime analysts specifically trained to study the database with the goal of identifying serial offenders have developed timelines on potential highway serial killer suspects. Law enforcement agencies nationwide have been asked to forward information about cases meeting highway serial killings criteria, including kidnapped or missing persons whose last known location was along a highway. VICAP was created in 2009 as part of the FBI's Highway Serial Killer Initiative. By 2019, the FBI had included more than 750 victims in its database and identified more than 450 possible predators. So this isn't like the TSA who can't find any terrorists. This VICAP seems to have actually done something. Curious. Very interesting that it yielded this much positive information and possible avenues of resolution. So that's over 450 possible predators. So it doesn't say how many convictions resulted from such, but 750 victims, that's a lot of people to be dying on and right off of highways. Wow, that's scary to think about. Strelzin's office has been investigating Murray's disappearance since shortly after her disappearance. We don't know if Maura is a victim, but the state is treating it as a potential homicide, he told Nancy West of the New Hampshire Union Leader in 2007. It may be a missing persons case, but it's being handled as a criminal investigation, which is quite curious because I guess 2007, wow, I thought that came later. So those that have been following the case since early on, they can comment here. So this article in Manchester Inklink is stating that Strelzin said this in 2007, that it's being treated as a potential homicide. And early on, of course, this is a simple DUI walkaway per local law enforcement. So what changed? What was the switch from DUI walkaway to potential homicide? Because not every DUI walkaway is handled as a potential homicide, even for people who never end up showing up. Because if there's no evidence of a crime, you're not necessarily going to state on record this is a potential homicide. I mean, how often is that stated for DUI walkaways, even when the person has not returned? The FBI was briefly involved in the investigation shortly after Murray disappeared, interviewing people in Massachusetts who knew her. Her disappearance is officially labeled as suspicious and was added to the state's cold case investigations unit in 2009. So, a lot of info there, and we still don't know what was the official impetus to adding Maura Murray to the VICAP network. It could just be a Hail Mary. It could just be some kind of grasp for positive publicity to give the illusion of a cold case being moved forward. I mean, who knows? But let's continue on here with Bill Rausch and the FBI. So let's look at some follow-ups here on the subreddit regarding the family friend FBI connection. Peabody posted on Web Sleuth, someone assumed Sharon says, "It is a fact that the FBI offered their assistance to New Hampshire law enforcement in Maura's case on Wednesday, February 11th. It seems unlikely that they would have offered their assistance if legally they could not get involved and unless they felt they should be involved. The FBI's offer was the result of Lieutenant Bill Rausch, Maura's boyfriend, contacting them regarding a call from a prepaid calling card very early the morning of February 11, 2004. Lieutenant Rausch was going through airport security and had his cell phone off. The missed call went directly to his voicemail. The very short message consisted of a female voice shivering and crying softly, ending with a muffled sob. The day after Bill and the Rausch family finds out that Maura's car was found in New Hampshire, they ask for FBI involvement, ? Their reason being that they believed Maura left a voicemail of herself shivering and crying. What reason would they have to go directly to the FBI at that point? Was it this family friend that Bill reached out to? Was the FBI investigation this family friend doing interviews like Bill and his friends were doing? The post goes on to say, during the first 10 days or so of Maura's missing, the FBI was very helpful to the Murray and Rausch families. They provided direction as to the correct course of action to take and stressed that they must work through New Hampshire law enforcement, always reminding the Murrays and Rausches to be sure to extend to New Hampshire law enforcement the information that the FBI was willing, upon invitation, to assist in the case. The FBI even gave them personal cell numbers as contacts. However, after about 10 days of communication with the FBI, the family received a phone call from the head of the New Hampshire Regional Office of the FBI stating that the New Hampshire State Police did not want their assistance, and as a result, all communication with the FBI should cease. Wonder where the directive came from? ? The Murrays and Rausches were told that because the FBI was not an official part of the investigation, they were sorry, but they would no longer be permitted to communicate regarding the case. Because Fred Murray let it be known through the media that the FBI was willing to assist, and in an attempt to placate Fred Murray, Lieutenant Scarinza asked the FBI to interview family and friends in Maura's hometown of Hanson, Massachusetts. The FBI was not involved in any investigation at UMass. The UMass campus police handled that end of the investigation. By the way, an investigation in which Maura's family and Lieutenant Rausch were very pleased. So this is the forum post on Web Sleuths. However, it is not accurate because, again, as we went over through other articles, the FBI did interview people at UMass and theoretically could have given gag orders. Again, we don't know what went down there. Some follow-up posts. Why the F would FBI be called ASAP over an abandoned car? And it seems it came all from the Rausch camp right out of the gate, too. A big More follow-up posts. Peabody's post also, that same post also says that Bill's mother was already arranging for his emergency leave, so the infamous voicemail couldn't have come from the American Red Cross, and we now know he wasn't granted e-leave, just advanced leave. Lots of contradictions in their narrative, which was pretty carefully crafted. Actually, a curious response here. If Rausch never got a call about the Saturn, was the whimper call set up to be the catalyst for all of them to head to New Hampshire? Wow. So if someone called from a calling card and pretended to be somebody whimpering or crying, but in a fashion that was very muffled intentionally so it could never really be discerned clearly, and that was going to be their excuse to rally the Rausch McDonald posse at the drop of a hat? More posts here. It makes no sense to think Bill has any pull over the FBI and wanted them involved for some nefarious purpose. If you're trying to insinuate this points to them knowing something more serious than a car crash going on from the start, I agree. And yet the other thing, though, if Bill is not the good guy here, why would he want the FBI involved? The FBI, in most people's minds, are quite more competent than local law enforcement or even state police. So, a lot more resources, more experienced agents, bigger networks. So, why would he want the FBI involved if he was guilty of something? Unless if he knew something else was going down, perhaps some kind of local corruption CI situation, and he knew the local police either couldn't handle it or wouldn't want to handle it due to conflicts of interest, perhaps he would want the FBI involved in that case if he's the good guy here. Follow-up posts. I'm trying to look at every single point that appears weird and not normal. I've found this in many spots, including family, like Fred not going straight to New Hampshire at 5 p.m. on Tuesday. As far as the Rausch family response, there hasn't been any solid sense over it unless there was major nefarious info that Billy Rausch had ahead of time. People have been pro or anti Billy Rausch all over the place, but I'll make clear that these points are only to point out severe oddities in responses to a tragedy. From Sunday's Hadley crash until the Rausch family arriving in Haverhill on Wednesday Eve is all super strange. Billy Rausch calling the FBI immediately points to something above and beyond. Maybe Billy Rausch knows something strange about UMPD or someone. Did Maura tell Bill Rausch, if you don't hear back from me, then something horrible is happening? His massive calls on Monday point to him being frantic times 100. Although there are motives for a boyfriend to harm their significant other, there are many other motives here to silence Maura from many different and possibly overlapping angles that are rarely discussed. There is no one who has any pull over the FBI, especially when the FBI has to follow federal law about getting involved in a case with zero signs of a crime and no body. All they can do is ask local cops to assist. This explains the back and forth of FBI helping at first, then backing off. If I was a law enforcement local officer and I heard that an enlisted guy was getting leave to fly 1,700 miles over an abandoned car, a DWI walkaway, and a long-distance spat, I would consider this the biggest first clue in the case. I would want to know what he knew to fly such long distance, and it's not just because he cares a lot. And how many times did Bill Rausch go back to New Hampshire to look for Maura after that time? I don't know. Another post here. Good stuff. Very intriguing. All this sounds like it occurred within days of Maura having gone missing, not months or even years later, during the first 10 days or so. If the feds were involved in the first 10 days or so, it must have been serious. Yet we never hear much, if any, follow-up on this. Oh wait, we kind of did, when Fred couldn't get anything from the state in his 2006 case. The silence rang pretty loud. Another response, agreed, it seems like the request for FBI involvement came very early and often from the Rausch camp. The same day, in fact, that Fred arrived in New Hampshire, then the New Hampshire branch of the FBI said communication should cease. Sounds to me like someone in the FBI was acting on behalf of the Rausch family. Another DC pin to put on the board. And the DC circle, of course, very curious. Here's a very interesting post. Could Fred have been left out of the loop per se? I'm of the impression that Billy Rausch and company were trying to solve some situation before Fred got involved. Huh. And did they also think they could solve it? Depending on what it was, of course. Another post here. I think this conversation with people here that it looks like the whimper call could have been used as a catalyst for the Rausch crew to go to New Hampshire and contact the FBI. So there was an immediate concerted effort to get in touch with the FBI, although there were no signs of any crime. What in the hell did the Rausch crew know ahead of time? Is this why Bill Rausch was viewed by local police as the prime suspect, as Sharon stated right away? There was nothing spoken about that comment ever again. Another great follow-up post here. Vermont State Police and New Hampshire State Police met with Burlington, Vermont FBI agent DJ Corbett in St. Albans. In a press release issued after the meeting, state police from Vermont and New Hampshire emphatically said there is no connection between the disappearances of Brianna Maitland of Sheldon, Vermont, and Maura Murray of Hanson, Massachusetts. Strong words. What do they know for sure that they aren't discussing with the public? That is a curious question, because how did they know with absolute 100% certainty? Now, it's different to say, well, this is an ongoing investigation, we're looking into it. There's no evidence to believe that there is, but they're stating there is no connection. Not they haven't seen evidence yet of a connection if there is one. Another post, to be so sure, law enforcement must have some insider knowledge where they know for sure that these two cases aren't related. Maybe it's that Maura wasn't at the scene or something odd. So let's go to Bill Rausch's timeline in terms of being the prime suspect. Another post from the subreddit. Going back to February 11th, 2004, we have this from Sharon Rausch. They interviewed Billy. He was a prime suspect. I've brought this up before, but here and there because it sticks out like a sore thumb. Here's the newspaper quote from her directly, and then Bill's statement. New Hampshire Union Leader, October 29th, 2007. Fred arrived in Haverhill early Wednesday. We arrived Wednesday around 7 p.m. They interviewed Billy. He was a prime suspect. He was totally distraught. I'll never forget the look on his face. He said, I feel as dirty as Scott Peterson. They think I've got something to do with it, Rausch said. This exchange has never been addressed by the Murrays, law enforcement, or the Rausch family ever again. Now, what is truly going on here? Obviously, if a young woman goes missing, they look at the boyfriend, spouse, and FBI facts point to this as the real reason for missing women 80 to 90% of the time. There are those cases every day across the country where it's proven true. There's Fred's car found in another state on a corner abandoned by someone. Not one single shred of evidence that anything seriously nefarious happened there. Nothing. It took 24 hours for Fred and Haverhill PD to get together. Then Wednesday, 2 days later, is when all these people arrive in that small hamlet town looking for answers. Now, what anyone believes about Bill, if police had asked him, what do you have to do with this? Then he could just say he was on base and flew out when he heard the news from Fred. But did law enforcement think it was weird for Bill and his family, not to mention the McDonald's, to fly so far and drop their plans so soon? Is this why law enforcement is questioning him? Whatever happened in the station seemed to shake Bill enough to believe that the cops believed he was the prime suspect. The prime suspect of what? It was an abandoned car and no one to ask what happened. So what in God's name allowed law enforcement to believe that Bill was the prime suspect? Most telling is that entire issue was never brought up by anyone after this news story. Gone. The Rausch family agreed to fly to New Hampshire to speak to police without counsel even. They did not hold Rausch at all, and he was free to roam around wherever he chose while here for the days he was allowed to be gone. Can anyone explain what this is all about? Why would Sharon put this out to news reporters? Was it all to put shame on the police early on? Anyone have any other options? It's baffling. Some responses. Sharon worked for a law office, so this is even more puzzling. She had to know letting her son travel from Oklahoma to New Hampshire and getting questioned by law enforcement without counsel was not a good look. Then putting it out in the news and referencing the Scott Peterson case? By the way, if Billy Rausch was indeed treated as a prime suspect, as Sharon says, wouldn't there be some sort of record of the discussion with law enforcement? Pretty sure someone can't just walk into a law enforcement station, get questioned, and there is no record of it. Another response, I've always felt that Billy Rausch and Sharon Rausch were too adamant in stating that Maura did not leave a note or letter to Bill Rausch on top of supposed mementos from him in her dorm room. They all got turned into being an old email, and now it's even an old email stuck in a book. How would they know what was found by UMPD so fast in her room, and why downplay it so much so that the engaged to be engaged can't be any happier status exists? We know it doesn't because Bill Rausch is in touch with his soon-to-be wife for 2 years at this point in 2004. Did they really think nobody would notice? Other posts, it would be interesting to know if Bill Rausch went to UMass when he arrived in New England on Wednesday. Bill Rausch and McDonald both definitely went to UMass before they all left for good, possibly around Thursday the 19th. Yet there was one article that stated Billy Rausch went to UMass upon arriving, because the article stated he went there 2 days after the accident, which would be Wednesday the 11th, the day all the Rausches came to New Hampshire. Yet there was time to go to her dorm before meeting with New Hampshire officials later that evening. Did Bill Rausch go there before his parents arrived from Ohio? Is that where they picked him up, or was it from the airport in Connecticut? It's hardly mentioned. Edit, Daily Collegian, 2005, her son arrived at Maura's dorm room with police just 2 days after she went missing. He said there was no recent letters to him from Maura that were found. So there seemed to be 2 visits to the Kennedy dorm. One when he arrived in New Hampshire, according to the UMass paper, possibly with his mother, and then another visit just before he left with McDonald. Interesting. More posts. If Bill Rausch went to UMass before he headed out to New Hampshire, it's very curious for a few reasons. If Fred was telling Billy Rausch that Maura was missing in New Hampshire, why would his first move be to go to UMass? Especially since Bill Rausch claims he received the whimpering voicemail he assumed was Maura. If UMPD let Billy Rausch into Maura's dorm on Wednesday, the 11th, that would technically be the first of 2 times he had some interaction with law enforcement, as later that night, Sharon says Billy Rausch was interviewed by Haverhill PD. Billy Rausch was on leave, so his time was very limited once he arrived in New England. Why spend any of this limited time at UMass if the search for Maura was supposed to be further north? It sounds like an awful lot of traveling that day. Oklahoma to Connecticut by plane, then down to UMass, then up to Haverhill, New Hampshire by car, I assume. Why would Bill Rausch need to go back to UMass and meet again with UMPD before he left to go back to Fort Sill? Also, why would he need McDonald to be with him? Maura was not family to either of them. To note, Fred met with UMPD to give a statement on Sunday, February 22nd. I see on Bill Rausch's phone records he makes a call to Connecticut that same afternoon. Was this perhaps Bill Rausch calling Fred at his hotel later on to see what Fred told UMPD? Interesting. Other responses, he's looking at about an hour drive to UMass if he rented a car before his parents arrived, then a 2-hour ride to Haverhill once they headed out. Did UMPD call Haverhill to let them know the boyfriend had just arrived at her dorm and to tell them it all seemed suspicious? But they never held him for further questioning or really anything after he spoke with Haverhill law enforcement. Do campus police just let people into a private room to peruse around at their own will when Maura sent out emails that she would be back in a week? She could have appeared at any moment for all any of them knew. It seems maybe McDonald was with him to give him some army clout or something. Other responses, so why have security in the lobby then? How the hell did UMPD even know who Billy Rausch was? Maura Murray at 21 could have multiple people she was seeing as boyfriends. Anyone could say that and get let into her room to go through all her stuff. Something is off. I bet Billy Rausch was already in the UMass vicinity on the weekend. No wonder he can't seem to find any flight info. And that would be quite damning if that were true. Or perhaps Billy Rausch has a friend in UMPD. That would answer some questions as well. Another response, which is of course very good, regarding Billy Rausch's phone activity. I still don't get how Billy Rausch made the amount of cell calls he did from Sunday the 8th to Tuesday the 10th, if he was supposed to be in the field training at Fort Sill. I mean, from his cell records, he was making calls for nearly 2.5 days straight at all hours. He had to be in a place with good cell reception and be constantly charging the phone. This is a good question because Cecil Smith is said to have called UMPD Tuesday night to check Maura's dorm room. Certainly by Wednesday, UMPD would have assumed or even knew that Maura was not in her room if they were accessing her computer. Or maybe UMPD started accessing her computer with suspicion after Billy Rausch left to head to New Hampshire. I mean, Haverhill PD called UMPD about checking Maura's dorm room Tuesday night, and then the very next day, if this is all true, the boyfriend shows up asking to get into her room as well. Certainly, UMPD was aware of Maura's breakdown at work a few days earlier, so this is all very suspicious when you think about it. Bingo. UMPD were aware of Maura's escort of her back to her dorm room before her shift ended, because they told Karen Mayotte to come in to give a statement on Thursday the 12th. Then, UMPD accessing her actual private computer is highly bizarre, knowing what they knew at that point. They were stealth enough to access Maura's AIM account to the point Maura's friends thought the missing message from UMPD was a prank. Weird expletive happening way too soon, in my opinion. A follow-up? Yup. Then on Friday, they have to tell her whole nursing class that she's gone for good. You would have thought they could wait at least a week or so. Huh. The posters also discussed the Saturn situation and even the fact that Fred Murray waits until a snowstorm to come up to replace the Saturn with another car, but then he doesn't bring enough money or whatever. A lot of curiosities, but here's an interesting post. I'd be interested to know if there was a main car key found in the Saturn at the Weathered Barn corner. It's been said that when Fred went to Lavoie's garage to see the Saturn on Friday, February 13th, he started the vehicle with a spare key he knew was on a magnet under the Saturn. Either someone drove the Saturn to New Hampshire using a main key and either took it with them while fleeing the scene or left it behind. Someone used the spare key, then placed it back under the Saturn when the car was abandoned, or the Saturn was towed but then abandoned at the Weathered Barn corner. And those are great questions there, by the way. So more notes here. Billy Rausch was never arrested or read Miranda rights as a prime suspect, nor was he ever admitted by police as a POI in the Maura Murray case. It is only the perceived notion by Sharon and Billy Rausch themselves. Another post here. Why did law enforcement tell the Rausch family on February 11th, Wednesday evening, that Maura was headed to and already in Ohio? What they did say has never been mentioned much again. When the Rausches insisted the call was not American Red Cross, then they were all told that the police believed that Maura was upset with her family and that she was already in Kenton, Ohio, on her way to the Rausch residence. Again, the Rausches disputed this because Kenton is northwest of them, and they asked if they perhaps meant Canton, and the officer became hostile and said there was no Canton in Ohio. FYI, Canton is northeast of the Rausches and would have made some sense. Canton is about a 1.5-hour drive from the Rausch residence on the way from UMass. This ranks up there with the idea that law enforcement thought Billy Rausch was the prime suspect 2 days later when he was stationed in the Army 1,700 miles away and had just flown into New England. Putting everything into context, the Rausch family dropped everything with information that Maura's college Saturn had been found abandoned in New Hampshire and spoke with New Hampshire law enforcement the evening of February 11th, Wednesday. 3 giant pieces of weirdness automatically jump out here. It was a local law enforcement issue until New Hampshire State Police became involved on February 11th, Wednesday. In a very short amount of time, they were flip-flopping the entire script. Let's see. To all else, it was Maura drove her car to New Hampshire, upset and leaving college for a week, spun out and hit, insert idea here, then vanished in mere minutes. Sounds familiar to everyone, right? But while the Rausch family is sitting in the police department Wednesday evening, law enforcement has a different narrative to put forth to them, different from public perception, all 3 of which the Rausch family spilled out themselves quite quickly. 1. Bill Rausch is the prime suspect. Both Sharon and Bill came out of there and stated this feeling. This does not sound like law enforcement welcomed their help in finding Maura at all, even if they both had been fighting or whatnot. 2. The whimper call was not Maura and was the Red Cross. I don't know how law enforcement established this right away, but they seemingly were deflecting all insinuation that it was Maura calling Bill Rausch a day or 2 later after crashing her car. And of course, I went over that Red Cross call on the Londonderry Ping podcast episode. 3. Maura was heading towards Ohio. I also went over this on the Ohio episode if you want more information about this. Now, obviously, we have a big issue. Fred had arrived to search also on Wednesday, yet law enforcement tells the Rausches that Maura was headed to Kenton, Ohio. Obviously, Canton is the town on the way, not Kenton. Either way, law enforcement already had info of this action, which does not line up with Maura being in the Saturn in New Hampshire. Make note that at the time, law enforcement believed Maura may have already been in Ohio. In whose car if her Saturn was in New Hampshire? This concludes 3 contradictions from what everyone knows of this story. 3 direct and opposite ideas that have all been squashed or discontinued. Why? This is from a local article on the day Bill Rausch left New Hampshire. The Caledonian Record, February 21st, 2004. Last week, they were told by investigators it was believed Murray had headed toward the Rausch's home in Marengo, Ohio, because she was having family trouble. Sharon Rausch said although she didn't believe that, she had one of her children who had stayed behind put notes on the door for Murray and left the home unlocked. However, Murray has not turned up in Ohio. What did law enforcement know right away that was the opposite of everything everyone else thought was going on? 3 distinct and very telling pieces of a narrative that haven't been explored really since those first few weeks. These 3 things did not pop out of thin air, especially 2 days after a college student vanishes without any signs of a crime in a suspected DWI walkaway. Then the public believing she drove to New Hampshire and then flew away from there like Mary Poppins minutes before the police arrived. Curious. Some responses here. If it's true and Billy Rausch went to Maura's dorm at UMass on Wednesday, February 11th, as Sharon has said, I have to really question the whimpering call that Billy Rausch and Sharon were pushing so hard. I mean, if Billy Rausch was told that Maura was missing somewhere up in New Hampshire, why would his first reaction upon arriving in New England be to travel down to UMass, especially if he really believed he received a distressed voicemail from Maura? Also, and I know I harp on this, Billy Rausch has said that when Fred called him Tuesday afternoon, he really didn't have much information to go on regarding Maura. Fred waited until the next day to make the drive from Connecticut to Haverhill, New Hampshire, yet Bill Rausch was supposedly in some sort of panicked state, trying to get e-leave at Fort Sill and having his mother work with the Red Cross. Either Fred specifically requested Billy Rausch and his parents' help, knowing full well those would be some extreme travel arrangements, or Fred was surprised to see the Bill Rausch entourage up in New Hampshire with him the very next day. It can't be both, it's one or the other. Other posts here, even a year later, Fred and his family convinced it's foul play, while Sharon kept writing notes to Maura as though she were out there somewhere reading everything. Sharon stayed away from foul play and really weighed heavy on Maura running off. A week later, on Thursday the 19th, it looks like Billy Rausch is blowing up Kate's cell like a jealous boyfriend. He tries calling her almost a dozen times that afternoon, one after the other. Very odd. Also, Sarah a few times. There's a lot Fred has not commented on. I also wonder about the family problems that law enforcement believed Maura Murray was having. Are these totally hushed up? More responses here. This is an excerpt from the New Hampshire Union Leader, October 29, 2007. Almost 4 years later, it is still a mystery, but the suicide theory has been hard for the people who love her to even think about. Early on, her father, Fred Murray, briefly considered Maura may have committed suicide. When police assembled the Murray and Rausch families to brief them on the investigation, Maura's father moaned and rubbed his head and said, "Oh no," according to Sharon Rausch, the mother of Billy Rausch, Maura's then-boyfriend. Or allegedly, depending on if they broke up or not. I remember Fred said, I always have told the kids when I got old and worthless, I was going to climb my favorite mountain with a bottle of Jack Daniels and drink myself to death. That was emotional. He thought, what if there was something he didn't know about? Rausch said. She said authorities thought the Tylenol and alcohol Maura bought may have been indications that she was going to kill herself. That's what people do. They drink, take a bunch of pills, and die peacefully, she said. These are weird things to say from Sharon. I mean, this is weird. And again, is there any evidence she was the one who bought the alcohol? Again, I don't know what hallucinations and assumptions people are going with, but if we're just following the evidence strictly here, objectively, logically, neutrally, not hallucinating things that haven't been definitively proved have, like a lot of coincidence theorists and narrative steerers love to do, since they're allergic to actual logic. Without the actual liquor store footage, that receipt could belong to anybody. Again, wouldn't be the first time there was a staged vehicle to make it look like someone took a vehicle somewhere. Wouldn't be the first time. I mean, it wouldn't be the second time. Wouldn't even be the 100th time. Again, I don't know how many people are new to true crime and they only follow the Maura Murray case, but staging a vehicle, I mean, that's kind of the go-to for a lot of perpetrators of crimes. It is not original in any way. But continuing on with more posts here, I'm not sure what to make of that, but perhaps Sharon and company knew something that Fred didn't. Although I can't imagine they would want to keep that from the family. Even over a year later, Fred and family are convinced it's foul play, while Sharon kept writing notes to Maura as though she were out there somewhere reading everything. Sharon stayed away from foul play and really weighed heavy on Maura running off. A week later, on Thursday the 19th, it looks like Billy Rausch is blowing up Kate Markopoulos' cell phone like a jealous boyfriend. He tries calling her almost a dozen times that afternoon, one after the other. Very odd. Also Sarah Alfieri a few times. And of his calls to Kate, I wonder if he was telling her he was headed to or already at UMass Tuesday the 10th and Wednesday the 11th, or stopping there before he went back to Fort Sill. His West Point friend Bob/Sam mentioned his communication with Kate on the Missing Maura Murray podcast. And that's a whole nother can of worms. We won't get into that here. I've covered that in the past. More posts here. I think at the time Fred was so distraught about everything that he probably just was glad to have the extra help, although there wasn't much time of them together from all the stories. It seems like Billy Rausch was either with his father or Bob McDonald while riding around the tri-state area, while Fred must have stayed right there in town. Emotions at the time aside, the way Billy Rausch tells the story about Tuesday night, February 10th, and the call between him and Fred, it sounded like no big deal, as Fred told him he didn't have much information other than the Saturn was found abandoned in New Hampshire, and Fred was going up there to find out what was going on. If Fred did indeed wait until Wednesday to head to Haverhill, he obviously didn't think the situation was all that dire at the moment. Otherwise, I would think he would have dropped everything and headed out the second he heard whatever news. And that's true. I mean, anybody who's seen Fred in the interviews, I mean, he does not sound like the type of father who would just put things off unnecessarily. I mean, if any father truly believed their daughter was in danger, they would drop everything and go. So clearly, there seems to be something that the Rausch-McDonald posse knew. And then also, we do have the story between Fred and Julie Murray. He was telling Julie Murray not to get emergency leave. So what does Bill Rausch know to drop everything and get out there? And we'll be getting into the exact leave and all that paperwork and everything that has plagued this case from the get-go regarding how Billy Rausch got to New Hampshire. We'll be getting to that in a couple moments. But yeah, clearly there's no major rush here. Fred would have had a much easier time dropping everything as he was much closer to New Hampshire and probably could have easily called off work the next day. Billy Rausch and company had a much more difficult task at hand with regards to getting to New England. Billy Rausch was 1,500 miles away in Oklahoma and had to get approval for leave from the Army. He then would have had to book a flight, as he claims he did that night. His parents were a 9+ hour drive out in Ohio. They too would I assume, made arrangements with their respective employers to be gone for some time, or at least a few days that week. I don't doubt Fred welcomed whatever help he can get, but at some point, someone had to think it odd how quickly the Bill Rausch entourage zipped up to New Hampshire in a matter of hours over what was initially said to be a DWI walkaway. And we can't forget the Freudian slip in his interview with Aaron Larkin, where Billy Rausch said that Julie had called him. And here's the excerpt here. Well, so I found out similar to Julie. For me, I just finished eating dinner and received a call from Fred, and Fred told me that Maura's car was found on the side of the road in New Hampshire and she was missing, and like Julie, I asked a bunch of questions. Like Julie, I didn't get many answers. Fred told me what he knew, which wasn't much. He was going to New Hampshire, and so I told him, hey man, I'll be there soon. Interesting. Since there are no outgoing calls from Billy Rausch to Julie on those phone records, he may have been communicating with her via AOL Instant Messenger. I do recall Julie saying once that a lot of her communication with Maura did involve AOL Instant Messenger at the time. If Julie stayed in touch with Billy Rausch post West Point and talked to him after Maura went missing, I can imagine AOL Instant Messenger would have been a logical source, or maybe Julie was one of his incoming calls. If they used AIM a lot, wouldn't these people have messages from Maura saved on everyone's computer? UMPD somehow used Maura's own personal and private AIM account, asking if anyone had seen her. This was Wednesday, if I remember correctly, and Maura's friends thought it was Maura playing a prank. And there's a lot of problems with the way they hijacked that, because if she said she'd be away for a week, there's no evidence she was even driving the Saturn, and they're already hijacking her dorm room and computer and doing all of these things with no evidence of an actual crime. According to law enforcement themselves, there was no evidence of an actual crime. FBI's not going to track them to California or whatever Scarinza was saying in a very insensitive manner, but yet they're hijacking her dorm room and her AOL account? That's kind of weird. Interesting post here. Total invasion of privacy. What if there was stuff on there she didn't want her employer or college to see? Huh. Other post. I agree, people can argue this all day, but laws are created to protect your Fourth Amendment rights and from them being violated. This was not dragging someone out of a burning car or apartment or kicking down a door to apprehend a rapist. There were clear emails of being out for a week, and whether anyone abandoned a car along the road with zero signs of a crime should not have alerted anyone to be frantic at that time. Unless, of course, this was some kind of CI situation. I keep going back to that. And if someone tipped off the FBI to the CI situation, and maybe not Haverhill PD or even New Hampshire State Police, maybe only the FBI. And is that what the additional information that they had? Another post, I have a very hard time believing that Fred was extremely distraught when he found out his car was abandoned in New Hampshire. But more importantly, Maura hadn't already been heard from in 24 hours, yet Fred wanted to sleep to drive up to Haverhill the next morning. Yes, he would arrive at night, but he still waited. Huh. Another possibility, whatever Maura was upset about. Now, let's say I brought up this possibility in the previous episode. If Maura maybe tried to tell Fred that something was going on, but either didn't finish or whatever, maybe Fred cut her off. If Fred was maybe under the impression that it was just typical college stuff, boy stuff, whatever, whereas she was trying to convey something a lot more dangerous, possibly a CI situation, possibly some UMPD corruption with drugs in the dorm, whatever, and she didn't actually tell him, but maybe she started to. Maybe he's under the impression it's boy trouble, she's under a lot of stress. If he thought maybe she really did just play hooky for a few days, that's why he wasn't alarmed, because he was working with whatever information or assumptions he was going off of based on his last interactions with her. Maybe that's it. But again, what did the McDonald Rausch posse know? So here's some more astute posts here which don't make any sense in terms of what law enforcement is doing. Fred had arrived to search also on Wednesday, yet law enforcement tells the Rausches that Maura was headed to Kenton, Ohio. I don't understand why Fred would be searching for Maura in whatever parts of New Hampshire early Wednesday. But when the Billy Rausch entourage arrived later that night, law enforcement is supposedly telling them they believed Maura was actually headed to Ohio. I assume that when Fred arrived in New Hampshire early Wednesday, he went straight to Haverhill PD for info and to find out where his Saturn was being stored. Could Fred have possibly mentioned something to Haverhill PD Wednesday morning about Maura going to Ohio that law enforcement used to question Billy Rausch and company about later that night? Whoa, okay, that's actually kind of interesting, because what did Billy Rausch and Fred really talk about? And there's other posters on social media that believe why the Murray family never went after Bill Rausch is because they have dirt on each other or something to that effect. Not official blackmail or anything, but there's just sensitive details that they wouldn't want each other's camps to reveal about each other, so they kind of go with the salt of the earth narrative. Or maybe not. Again, these are just musings from people online trying to make heads or tails of what is possibly one of the most bizarre and confusing missing persons cases in history. There's not another case like this one. Also to note regarding Wednesday, February 11th, is that Billy Rausch had 3 outgoing calls to Fred's cell phone, all lasting 2 minutes or less. 5:49 a.m., 5:58 a.m., and 6:03 a.m. Did Billy Rausch not call Fred at all Wednesday night when he finally arrived in New Hampshire with his parents? I really don't get them all showing up together at Haverhill PD just to have Billy Rausch get interrogated by law enforcement, according to Sharon. And what's also curious is none of these tertiary parties have revealed their cell phone records to my knowledge. What would Bob McDonald's cell phone records reveal? What would Sharon Rausch and Bill Rausch Sr.'s phone records reveal? Fred has always been on the she is there train when it comes to where Maura was last seen. However, he was probably driving on his way to New Hampshire from Connecticut when Billy Rausch tried to call him those 3 times early in the AM. Fred always said he arrived early to the police department, but what was exchanged then for info? Why didn't he see the car until Friday? Wouldn't the owner want to see the damage and look at his own car right away? I'm sure police said to wait, but still. And the people that believe in the law enforcement conspiracy, was there some damning info in the vehicle? And law enforcement had to scrub it? Or if there was some kind of FBI, CIA, DEA op, the coincidence theorists always want to sweep under the rug that DEA undercover vehicle that was called in and is mentioned in the transcripts in the area. And of course, there was also the U.S. Marshal activity. Coincidentally, Haverhill, that Monday, in this hamlet in the middle of nowhere. I mean, the coincidence, I can see why the coincidence theorists really love this case. Because if you love being a coincidence theorist, and if you just love writing off coincidences and anomalies as nothing to see here, I mean, this is the case where you'd get to do it the most times. So if there was some other op going on that night, did they have to scrub the car? And that's why Fred couldn't see it until they were done with it. Was there undisclosed FBI, CIA, DEA, U.S. Marshal activity? Maybe even Men in Black activity. Who knows at this point? But there was undisclosed activity and they needed access to the car, and that's why Fred couldn't see it until they were done with it. Fred has never, if I remember correctly, mentioned Maura driving off to Ohio or quitting school. In fact, for the first week, they wanted her to come back from wherever she was hiding. It's possible with Billy Rausch flying and Fred driving that they didn't connect. Yet what happened after the Rausch family left the police department? It must have been getting late. Didn't they all stay at the same motel? Did the Rausch family and Fred never connect that day? I'm sure Fred wasn't able to reach them, either if they sat with police for a few hours. Fred also never mentioned going to UMass, but Kathleen had all of the things from the car and her dorm room on the 19th to take to her place. Just so many unanswered fill-in-the-blanks everywhere going on. They seem trivial, but they aren't. It keeps some rabbit holes from further wasted time if these things were all known. And that's a good point. That's a really good point. A few other posts here. I was reading today this Google group from 2004. Within a week or so of February 9th, they flew, they drove, they are all in copied newspaper articles. No article is alike. Huh. I would think Sharon or Bill Rausch Sr. could confirm whether they flew out of Ohio or drove. It's been widely accepted that they drove, but I have read at least one article that says Billy Rausch's parents flew from Ohio to New England. It's a big difference in my opinion. If they drove from Ohio on Wednesday, they would have had to leave very early, as it's a 9-hour drive from Marengo. If they flew, they would have had to arrange a flight plan, both of which seem extreme if Fred didn't know much on Tuesday night. I mean, how many parents of a boyfriend or girlfriend immediately book a flight as soon as there's a possible DWI walkaway with zero signs of a crime taking place? I mean, I've posed this question before. Like, there needs to be a poll, because a lot of coincidence theorists seem to think it's perfectly normal to just drop everything over a DUI walkaway. But how often is this done? I've actually never heard of this being done. None of my family, friends, extended network, anybody I've asked online in relation to this case, thousands and thousands of people discussing this case online, not a single account has been brought forward. Nobody even made one up yet. If they have, I haven't seen it. We haven't even seen anyone make up an account where the friends of, where the family and possible former college professor of the significant other, non-married, just dropped everything on a dime and made these huge journeys, these treks over a DUI walkaway with zero evidence of a crime. Even when there is evidence of a possible crime, how quickly does that happen? But again, so far, nobody's even went through the trouble of fabricating an account or making something up and saying it happened. So what does that tell us? More posts. Either way, this is in stark contrast to Julie saying that when her dad called her about the situation, or lack thereof at the moment, he told her to stay put at Fort Bragg until he went up to Haverhill, New Hampshire to find out what was going on. And yet, the Billy Rausch entourage was in full panic mode. Nothing bizarre at all about this. Another post here, we haven't talked about this. Curiously, and I don't know if this is important or not, but Julie Murray only arrived on the day that Bill Rausch left forever. Coincidence or planned? Why would that be? Your own sister has vanished, and her surrogate family is traveling and scrambling all over New England with posters, etc., while you get arrangements to be there once they all have left. Odd. I mean, if that's the earliest she could be there and it just happened to be the day they left, I mean, that's what would make it a coincidence. But that's kind of curious. That's a little curious. Or did Julie Murray just really not want to run into Bill Rausch? For whatever reason. Another post. I remember Julie saying something along the lines of Billy Rausch would have been listening to Fred and what he wanted him to do when he was in New England. I took that to mean Fred would have been ordering Billy Rausch where to search or what to do, and that Fred would have known where Billy Rausch was at all times. However, if Julie wasn't there when Billy Rausch and company were, I don't see how she would know that for sure. I take that as her assumption of events at this time. Interesting that Julie showed up after the Billy Rausch entourage left for good. You know, we really don't talk about this enough, but if this Rausch McDonald posse, they cared about Maura that much that they just dropped everything, took leave from their jobs, started interviewing neighbors, and just went there, and then they never go back ever again. If they cared that much to drop absolutely everything and get out there, I mean, obviously they're not going to stay out there forever, but you'd think they'd be able to make at least 1 or 2 return trips. I mean, wasn't Fred Murray up there like every single week or every other weekend for a year or two, whatever? They couldn't make it back a single time? Is that weird? I mean, Bob McDonald cares about Maura that much that him and his wife are leaving their teaching jobs to go look for her at the drop of a hat because she might have abandoned a vehicle, which she may or may not have even been driving or may not have been even in that state. And yet they don't come back a single time, if that's true? I mean, is there any evidence they came back a single time to help Fred, even just one other time? Just one? Is that weird? Is that weird to anybody? So apparently this was, the date was the 22nd. There was an article, non-sourced here, so if anybody can find it. Supposedly there was a news article that said that Billy Rausch's leave was up, so he had to get back the 22nd, or leave the 22nd, And that was the day Julie arrived from getting leave, coincidentally. So as soon as Bill Rausch's leave is up, Julie, unless maybe it's not a coincidence, because if there's an innocent explanation here, was that coordinated? So then when Billy Rausch couldn't help, Fred Murray would have Julie to help. Did they do that on purpose to maximize the amount of days? Although technically, I mean, this is Julie Murray's sister, not a girlfriend or boyfriend, possibly ex, depending on the situation with Bill Rausch, which we don't know about. So I would think emergency leave would be less of an issue, especially if it's no longer, because this is February 9th, and then Julie Murray's getting there the 22nd. Her sister is missing now for weeks. I mean, this is, now it's kind of a situation. There's an actual emergency here as opposed to, in one day. I mean, who knows if she went up to just play hooky for a day or two. That wouldn't be the first time in history a college student has done that, even if it was theoretically out of character. So, yeah, I mean, these are bizarre situations that nobody seems to want to talk about. Another post, I also still have a hard time believing that Billy Rausch's middle-aged parents drove 10 hours in wintertime and would have had to leave at about 3 a.m. from Ohio to get there in time. It makes more sense if they flew also and arrived at the same airport to all connect with a rental car. Even if they flew to New England, though, they would have had to book a flight and plan for an arrival and departure. It makes no sense at any point in time. Maura could have called someone or showed up somewhere and said she was fine. And that's something, I've mentioned this before too. The coincidence theorists really don't want to think about this. But let's say the Rausch McDonald posse scrambled there over a DUI walkaway. As soon as they get there, what if Maura showed up, got the car, went back to UMass, and as they arrived in Haverhill, and they're like, what's going on? And she calls them, oh yeah, I'm back at my dorm. Yeah, the car got, had car trouble, stayed at a hotel overnight, my cell phone died. Yeah, now I'm back, everything's fine. Why are you guys here? Well, why'd you guys drop everything to go a quarter of the way across the country just because the car was abandoned? I mean, somebody's cell phone could die, or maybe the cell phone broke. If she accidentally dropped the cell phone, I mean, that wouldn't be the first time, especially if she's, distraught and upset. Or maybe she broke it herself if she was angry. People smash their own cell phone when they're angry and emotional. Maybe she had a spat with Bill Rausch or whatever. And the phone wasn't the phone given to her by the Rausches? So maybe that was kind of an extension of her anger. Whatever. Or the phone just died. Or the phone malfunctioned. Not every phone works perfectly. Maybe the battery stopped working or the charge port got messed up. That happens on cell phones. And so she had to get a new phone or a replacement phone, whatever. She gets to her dorm, and then they're calling the dorm, and she just randomly picks up and she, hey, why are you guys in Haverhill? But nobody wants to think about that. So continuing on this post, what would have happened if the Billy Rausch entourage showed up in New Hampshire only to find out that Maura was okay and just missed a few days of classes at UMass? Turn around and go home? Also, what about hotel accommodations once they all arrived in New England? Did the Billy Rausch entourage have that planned out? I can't imagine them making all these travel plans but no confirmation on where they were going to stay once they arrived. I doubt they just winged it. If they all made these extreme travel plans and hotel accommodations before arriving in New Hampshire, I would have to think Billy Rausch and company knew that whatever was going on with Maura was very dire. Otherwise, I don't see the need for such a reaction. Yes, those are excellent points too. Fred may have said he would be at the Wells River Motel, and the Rausch family and later McDonald stayed there too, but the first night, ? The super quick plans almost seem impossible for his parents. I mean, once they all knew about the car itself, they allegedly all had to sit around and wait until Billy Rausch was even okayed to go? No way. Then, not only did Billy Rausch have to get his ticket lined up, he got a buddy to drive him to the airport. Lawton Airport is 15 miles away, but only flies to Dallas. But Oklahoma City Airport is 1.5 hours away. Anyone who has ever dealt with flying knows this seems a stretch. The way Rausch describes it, he had to jump through a lot of hoops and go through multiple channels of command to even be allowed. Meanwhile, his parents stayed awake all night waiting to get the go-ahead and then to make their arrangements too, and all meet up seamlessly? Come on now. Maybe it's why his dad has never said a peep, because it's all BS. I've asked loads of times why would they all drop everything over an abandoned car and or DWI walkaway, and it's crickets. I would wager that I wouldn't be able to find any boyfriend or girlfriend's parents who would do all that with what was known. Nope. And again, we're still waiting. If any Mindshock listeners out there know anybody, know any boyfriend or girlfriend's parents who would drop everything at the drop of a hat over an abandoned vehicle with no sign of a crime taking place, and possibly get a former college professor who knew them to come along with his spouse. If that's ever happened before, feel free to chime in. Another follow-up post here. That's why I keep circling back to Billy Rausch's half-hour call home on Sunday afternoon. It's only speculation, of course, but if there were some plans being discussed prior to Tuesday the 10th, they likely were discussed during this call. At the very least, Billy Rausch could have alerted his parents that something was wrong, and that sparked their involvement. I just have a hard time believing the extreme travel plans for Billy Rausch and his parents were all made Tuesday night for them to all end up in New Hampshire the very next day. It's as believable as McDonald's saying Maura was not discussed during the call with Billy Rausch Monday night. That is kind of weird how they randomly had to say that. And yet, a few days later, the McDonalds are in New Hampshire talking to neighbors on 112 and driving around New England with Billy Rausch. And yes, what's up with Bill Sr.? It appears that Sharon did all the talking and was front and center all the time. I wonder what he would have to say about those days. Some people speculate that Bill Rausch Sr. is kind of a higher up in some kind of political or government circles. But again, I haven't seen any verification of that. But if there was some kind of a upper agency op going on, would he have some kind of pull? I don't know. This FBI friend of the family, was that through Bill Rausch Sr.? Another astute post here. Just stopped by to say that Billy called several, more than usual, Ohio numbers the evening of the 9th. Since all I have to go on for this is the billing statement for 1 month, it's probably a reach, but there was only one other night that Billy called as many, some of the same, Ohio numbers, and that was on January 31st. If I were guessing, I would say it looked like he doing a little partying or drinking the night of the 31st based on the late phone activity and repeated calls to certain numbers, at least based on my own similar experiences. What's also interesting, in my opinion, is that most of the time, based on their cell phone bill, Billy's first calling activity is to check his voicemail each day. The billing statement starts on January 23rd, and if you look at the range of dates, until he was notified that Maura was missing, of those 19 days, 10 days his first call activity is voicemail. 7 days his second call activity is voicemail. And in a few cases, the previous call is an incoming call that may have woke him up, which is why he didn't check his voicemail first. And then there are 2 days where he takes and makes multiple calls before checking his voicemail in the late afternoon, around 4:30 to 5 p.m., and that's February 1st and February 10th. Both days following the only days where he places multiple back-to-back calls to Ohio numbers that are not his parents' numbers. I mean, wow, that's a great comparison here from an astute sleuth that has really gone through these phone records and tried to account for controls, which is very important when you're ever making any kind of logical assessments. So that is curious. That is quite curious. Follow-up post, nice breakdown there. Also, I find it interesting that Billy Rausch didn't let the call from Fred's phone early Sunday morning, February 8th, go to voicemail. He answered that call. I would think getting a call coming in from your girlfriend's father's phone at that hour on a Sunday would be very alarming. Was Billy Rausch expecting Fred or Maura to be calling him at that hour? It's strange if it was Maura making that call from Fred's phone, in my opinion. If she did get her phone back on Sunday night, it looks like she never called Billy Rausch back, as he has some calls to her cell phone that afternoon. Voicemails from Maura's cell were being checked around 8 p.m. that night, and there's the 11:26 p.m. call from her phone to her dad that night as well. Curious that she supposedly called Billy Rausch from Fred's phone following the Hadley accident, but then never makes an outgoing call to Billy Rausch on Sunday. Wow. Yeah, I mean, yeah, we talked about that as well. Yeah, there's a lot of curiosities and unanswered questions here that Billy Rausch and Fred could both answer. I mean, I would think if there was enough interest in solving this case, we need to bring out the brain fingerprint scan technology. I talk about this all the time. For some reason, the true crime community has not really given this test the attention it deserves. This is what Stephen Avery took in Making a Murderer. Basically, it just bypasses any kind of intention to lie or deceive or tell the truth. It doesn't matter. It's all irrelevant. It just measures your brainwave activity for recognition. So with the proper questioning, it's much more effective than any kind of faulty polygraph. So Fred and Billy and Julie and Kate Markopoulos, Sarah Alfieri, Scarinza, all these people, if they took this brain fingerprint scan test, I think would have the truth here. I think this would be solved almost immediately after that. Follow-up posts here. Also weird is that Fred Sell contacts Billy Rausch for 10 to 11 minutes, then immediately Billy Rausch calls back for like 5 minutes. That's not a dropped call. It looks like someone, maybe Maura, was pissed at him and then hung up, so he has to call back to get the last word in. That's a stretch of guessing, of course, but those other Ohio calls at the time were other women that he knew. Was he calling to tell them that he was not in Ohio when he wasn't supposed to be in Ohio? Huh. Follow-up post. After reviewing the cell phone bill, Maura and Billy seem to have a pattern of hang-ups and callbacks while speaking to each other. There are a couple of calls on Maura's bill with others, her dad and Kathleen, interesting enough, that might be hang-up callbacks, but they look pretty insignificant compared to her call history with Billy. I know dorms can have horrible reception even now, so maybe that's it, but it does seem like it's mostly Billy calling back after that initial disconnection. Bill also has a pattern of calling repeatedly if someone isn't answering. And if he has multiple numbers for you, he's calling them all. Just kind of interesting that pattern stops with Maura around the 9th, but continues with others, like Kate Markopoulos. It definitely makes me wonder what the connection between those two nights and those blocks of calls could be. And they're right around the same time, 9 o'clock hour, both times, about 5 or 6 numbers each time, 3 common numbers between the 2 times. I mean, the guy had used up all of his leave, balance was 0. I wouldn't think he'd just be sitting at home for the next past several months. Wouldn't he have earned some leave back if he hadn't exhausted it pretty recently? Last thing, I swear, why did Billy have to have a friend drive him to the Oklahoma City airport, especially since his flight left so early? He's kind of made a big deal of that in the past, but it's 1 hour and 23 minutes from Fort Sill to OKC. I get that airport parking isn't cheap, but if you're going to go ahead and shell out for a last-minute flight and have your family drive 12 hours and stay in a hotel for a week or two, I don't know that I'd skimp on parking and throw an extra step in front of someone to find an extra step in of trying to find someone who would drive me to an airport. I mean, I don't know. If there was a friend around him that wasn't doing anything, maybe... I don't know. I would say that's probably the least suspicious out of all of these things, but who knows. Billy Rausch also has the same pattern of incessantly calling like a stalker with the woman involved in his current court case. Another follow-up here. All the dozen calls to Kate on the 19th are worse than a jealous boyfriend. Weird. Bill didn't use up his leave. It was the beginning of the year. So like PTO, he really didn't have any accumulated time to use. The claim is like most companies, you can borrow against your PTO if you need to, then balance it back. His story also was when Army commanders saw him on CNN on the 17th, he said they called to give him more time away because of the seriousness. However, it's possible he had a 3 or 4 day weekend which Army did give out, then called them to get additional time. If he had like a Saturday to Monday for free time, then called for additional time with Maura's case that would allow him up to the 22nd Sunday to be back at Fort Sill. Other posts here. The drive is 1.5 hours from Fort Sill to OKC Airport. But Dallas was mentioned also. However, no one has been able to verify these commercial flights as they don't exist on the FAA site that records all flights that use air traffic controllers in the U.S. Since no one knows Billy Rausch's flight plans, I don't believe at all that a buddy of his drove 1.5 hours one way to OKC Airport. Lawton, Oklahoma had an airport 11 miles from Fort Sill, but it only goes to Dallas. That sounds like the right and better fit since Dallas has been mentioned. However, we still don't know when his flight was. Another post here. I find it interesting that he had both Kate Markopoulos's dorm room and cell phone numbers. I get that he could have gotten them from a previous phone bill. I think it would be strange if Maura was giving out the phone numbers of her girlfriends to her boyfriend. Outside of these scenarios, maybe Billy Rausch and Kate exchanged numbers at some point unbeknownst to Maura. Another post. I vote he was analyzing her phone bill and got the numbers that way. Super embarrassing for Maura to have him doing this. Imagine if she just didn't want to talk to him and he starts this behavior with everyone she called in the last month. If that was the case, it would be embarrassing for sure. It would also appear to be some sort of control mechanism. Could Maura have not been on her mom or dad's phone plan? Why did she need to be on Billy Rausch's? I don't know that many women who would be on their boyfriend's cell plan back in college. Another post here. I think the cell phone records are so interesting. Probably because I feel that's one of the only things we really have in this case, plus Sharon was upset about them being released. I agree about how strange the call is from Fred's phone for so many reasons. One, how did Maura get Fred's phone without waking him? Did she go back outside the room to talk to Billy? Two, why call Billy at such a wild hour instead of waking up her dad to talk to him? Especially since he was right there and it was his car that was wrecked. And three, like you said, not much follow-up from either party after that call for the rest of the day on Sunday. Now add on the inconsistency in Billy's story regarding if Maura told him about the Hadley accident when she called from Fred's phone. He's said that she didn't and then said that she did. But then he doesn't call her again until almost 3 p.m. Wouldn't that have been right before she had to go to work on Sunday? Did he know she didn't have her phone? If that's the case, why not call Fred's phone to check on her? Aren't they all supposed to be very close? Close enough to drop everything and travel halfway across the country at the first sign of trouble, certainly. I think there are only 12 calls from Maura's phone after she gets her phone back, and 6 of them are to check her own messages. There's only one call, the call to her dad, that she's even really alleged to have spoken to anyone. If she really was the one who had her phone, it definitely seems like she was avoiding everyone. Here's another point, though. The calls from voicemail, I don't know if we got a final definitive answer on this from a cell phone rep or a cell phone technician. The calls to check the voicemail, how would that show up? Would that show up if someone else is calling the voicemail to check? How does that differentiate it from that particular number calling to check the voicemail? Because different people have said different things. Again, I'm not a cell phone technician. I don't know how that would show up on the bill. And I also don't know if different cell phone companies had that show up differently, because we've had different people online that claim to have worked for cell companies that have given different answers on that. So either way, if there's no evidence that Maura herself got the phone back, it could be somebody else using the physical phone to check the voicemail messages, or possibly somebody from a different number checking the voice messages. More posts. I could have 100 scenarios just from these unanswered questions. I've never been able to verify if she worked Sunday evening at the art gallery. Even if Sarah did give Maura her cell back, it doesn't mean she saw her at work, especially since she only had to walk 50 feet between dorms. Excellent and awesome point about her cell that needs doubling down on. You mentioned, why was Billy Rausch calling her cell phone at all? From the Fred cell call at 5 a.m., Maura would have had to explain to Billy Rausch why she didn't have her own cell. He would know this, and she probably said, "Don't call my cell until I get it back later." Billy Rausch never called Fred's cell back all day Sunday or Monday to reach Maura, and had no clue Fred had to get a rental, etc. Yet he did call Fred's cell right back near that 5 a.m. call after the accident, so he must have known to use Fred's cell unless otherwise told so. This is all based on Maura getting her cell back at all. Another very astute follow-up post here. I've never understood this either regarding why Billy did not call Fred's phone to check on her. For all the calls Bill Rausch made Sunday into Tuesday, if it was him using that phone, why didn't he just call Fred's phone and ask about Maura if he was in such a panic to talk to her? I've often thought that perhaps Billy Rausch, with the help of his parents and eventually the McDonalds, were trying to take care of something involving Maura before her family found out. I think that's why the Bill Rausch entourage all zipped up to New England so quickly. They wanted to get out in front of the narrative as quickly as possible. And another point here, if there was something not necessarily nefarious, but if there was some kind of fight or argument, Billy Rausch wouldn't necessarily want to talk to Fred, maybe, especially if it was his fault, or maybe if he just thought that Maura told Fred it was his fault, even if it wasn't. Again, we're just going through all the different possible theories here. He might have simply not wanted to talk to Fred at all, just because of whatever was going on between him and Maura. Now, that would actually point to him away from him being some kind of conniving, manipulative sociopath, because those people would have no problem talking to their girlfriend's father, even if they were in the wrong. So again, Billy Rausch could be the good guy through all this. He could have been trying to help Maura. Again, we really don't know any of this information. Another post here, I just thought of something. What if there were no further calls to Fred after that early 5 a.m. call because it wasn't Rausch who had his cell? Then this anonymous person obviously didn't know Fred, so he couldn't give away, or they couldn't give away, that Rausch had left his cell behind. The calls are all non-stop on Monday, then on Friday the 13th to McDonald's landline, they stop until the 19th. Is it even possible that his cell phone was mailed to him from someone in Fort Sill to New Hampshire during that off time? Billy Rausch said it was personal why it wasn't working. Granted, it's a far-fetched idea, but there seemed to be a lot of cell phone questioning going on here. Who had which phone and when? Wow, so this is a major mind shock, because even I did not consider this possibility. If Bill Rausch is somewhere else, either in Ohio or New Hampshire this whole time, did he leave his cell behind with a friend or accomplice of some kind for them to make all these crazy calls and use as an alibi for himself? Or maybe if Bill Rausch is the good guy, he's being manipulated and exploited by this other third party who's almost framing him by using his phone in this manner. I mean, I don't know. Again, this is the Maura Murray case, so we wouldn't really go down these kinds of possibilities in other cases. But when we have all these unanswered questions, I mean, these are all possible theories. I mean, I don't know what to make of that. Another interesting follow-up post here. This was 2004 after all, and letting someone borrow your cell phone back then has a whole lot different meaning than letting someone borrow your smartphone now. Those Nokia cell phones back in the day were junk. They were a lot closer to the throwaway phone versus the PC phones that hold personal email and apps, etc. we have now. Even when Maura left her phone at the party Saturday night, it may not have even been a concern to her. She wasn't paying the bill, and she didn't purchase the phone. Heck, Sharon was the one who purchased phone cards for her. I'd like to know if Maura had a cell phone prior to Christmas 2003, or was her communication with Billy Rausch mostly emails, letters, AOL-IM, landline calls, etc.? Yet, when we take into account this time period, early 2004, cell phones and how they were used and cared about at that time is a factor, in my opinion. All right, we're gonna get really, really crazy into Mindshock land now, if we weren't there already. Some very, very astute commentators here. I've pondered that if Maura hadn't been in the Hadley accident early Sunday, what was the plan supposed to be regarding driving Fred's car that night? I mean, if she arrived at the hotel safe and sound, was she staying the rest of the night there? Was she turning in the keys to her dad and then expecting him to drive her back to UMass at that hour? Or maybe her initial destination wasn't the hotel, but the accident changed that, and her only option was to be dropped off there. Unless Fred was incapacitated after drinks at Amherst Brew, I see no reason why Maura would have needed to borrow his car just for a party on campus. Fred dropping her off that night and having his Corolla available upon checkout Sunday morning makes much more sense to me. Yeah, that is kind of weird. Would college students that are going to party real late, would they make plans to return a vehicle super early in the morning? I mean, I don't know. Maybe some would. I mean, some college students are kind of crazy like that. But would most college students not want to get up early after a night of partying and drinking? Follow-up post here. From raising two teenage girls, I have a strong suspicion that Fred may have been blindsided, especially if he had too much to drink and went straight to sleep. I can see the two girls just taking his car by being sneaky, with a plan of going to meet guys or whatever, then get his car back to him early because Fred was an early riser. She had to get his car back by 4 or 5 a.m., expecting him to have no clue. Fred isn't a stupid man, but the accident changed all that, and then the cat was out of the bag and it was too late. It may not have even been Maura's idea to take Fred's car out. So here's the thing with this theory. Now, for whatever reason, is it possible, if Maura was in danger through some kind of CI situation, not only is the Saturn possibly not drivable, but using the Corolla may have been safer because nobody would have known she had that vehicle. It's a relatively nondescript vehicle anyway. I mean, there's so many Corollas around. I mean, that's a pretty good vehicle to blend in. So maybe it was for a good reason that she needed to use it, but if she didn't tell Fred even about using it, because it is kind of weird, if she's just going to a campus party, why does she need his car? Now, if they're going bar hopping or party hopping to all these off-campus parties, that's another story. Now, does Kate Markopoulos have a car? Then again, even if she does, maybe she didn't want to drive it because she was drinking a lot. But then if Maura was as well, why is she driving the car? So there's a lot of unanswered questions here. There's definitely a lot of unanswered questions, but that would definitely make Fred Murray a lot angrier, right? Because not only did she get into an accident, but did she get into an accident after taking a car without permission? More follow-up posts. To me, it seems like law enforcement think Bill Rausch is lying about the whimpering call. Bringing in the Red Cross like that seems to go back to his alibi where Mom is supposedly helping him get emergency leave. They probably think this is strange as he is an adult. Plus, I really have never heard law enforcement confirm his alibi and flight records. The Red Cross has also been silent. You would think they would confirm the call. Law enforcement has to also wonder, as do all of us, why Bill Rausch showed up so fast with his entourage, who all dropped everything they were doing to run to New Hampshire. Did law enforcement think Billy Rausch was helping her ditch the Saturn and brought her to Ohio? Billy Rausch's half-hour call home on Sunday the 8th, 2:56 p.m. really stands out in my opinion. If there was some travel plans being arranged prior to Monday, I'd have to think it's that call that got the ball rolling. By the way, I'd love to know just when Sharon started calling the Red Cross on Billy Rausch's behalf, as she has said. I have a hard time believing it was Tuesday night. I venture on to think it was probably Sunday or Monday. Okay, so here's another possible mind shock here. New Hampshire Union Leader, February 13th, 2004. The only thing they do have to go on is a call Bill Rausch received on his cell phone after he flew back to Massachusetts late Tuesday. Interesting phrasing there. So the post here, can anyone explain what is being put forth here in this article for the Friday of that week? Sure, reporting can be worded wrong, but this says that Billy Rausch got the whimper call when he flew back to Massachusetts late Tuesday. Was he actually in UMass over the weekend on leave, flew back to the Army, then got the call about the Saturn, and flew back when the Army extended his leave as he says? Anyone? Question mark. Is this the entire reason local law enforcement grilled him, because they did know he was around that weekend? When Bill Rausch got the call from Fred, it was Tuesday around dinner time, but he said he flew to New England Wednesday morning, where the whimper call came into his cell in the airport, of which there have been no flights shown as of yet. I mean, so, okay. But if Billy Rausch really was in Amherst that weekend, wouldn't that have been known? I mean, I think that'd be tough to keep quiet. I mean, I don't know. More posts here. Interesting that the article was published on Friday the 13th. If Billy Rausch and company arrived on Wednesday the 11th, when did the New Hampshire union leader even meet up with them to get the story published? Also, why was this a story so early on anyways? What was Sharon contacting the local papers those first couple of days? I still say it was doubtful Billy Rausch was on base at Fort Sill doing any kind of training, because looking at the phone records, he was making nonstop calls from Sunday afternoon all the way into Wednesday at all hours, day and night. That's not to say he wasn't in Oklahoma, but it's hard to imagine him in the field training while using his cell phone that much and needing to charge it. Flying back to Massachusetts late Tuesday, if true, really makes me question the call from Fred's phone to Billy Rausch early Sunday morning, February 8th. Was it Fred calling Billy Rausch and thought or knew that Billy Rausch was in Massachusetts that weekend? Follow-ups here. Okay, here comes crazy talk. Did Fred learn the Saturn hit Vassy and wanted to protect Maura, and Billy Rausch knew also from the 12:20 call Thursday evening where Maura was upset? Fred and Billy Rausch equally have never gone against each other. No one can go after the other because too much is known. There's a plan to ditch the Saturn to avoid any hit-and-run charges, manslaughter, or get sued. The early morning call was Fred talking to Bill. When looking at it, it says Fred's cell called Billy Rausch, then he called right back. Weird. UMPD questioned Fred. Maura said someone was in her room. Sunday, Billy Rausch called the parents for half an hour. Billy Rausch went to UMass first and before leaving New England. Law enforcement thought Maura was on her way to Ohio. This is just a mess writing it all out. More posts. I'm with you on this for sure. I just think things make more sense if we consider that perhaps Billy Rausch and company already had their travel plans set in place prior to Tuesday night, versus trying to believe they all just dropped everything and headed to New Hampshire because Fred called Bill Rausch and told him basically nothing. True. However, can all these people be in on something secret yet remain fixating on searching for Maura? It's a lot. The only caveat against Billy Rausch being around that weekend has to be the sheer amount of people being silent for him or not giving up any info to law enforcement. It's a tough one. Although maybe law enforcement grilled Bill Rausch when he got to the station because a witness did say he was around Maura, good or bad. It would make sense if maybe the cadet at the Hadley scene was Bill Rausch. Wow. I cannot believe in 70 plus episodes we have not even gone over that scenario yet. I mean, it seems like it would be impossible, because why would Hadley PD and Ruddock, why would they cover for Bill Rausch? Unless the cadet wasn't there at the time Ruddock arrived. Like, what does cadet on scene mean? Or Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of unanswered questions here. There definitely are. More posts. Bingo, this may explain law enforcement and their attitude to this case. If Billy Rausch and Fred knew about Vassy and were trying to help out by ditching the Saturn, they can't really tell law enforcement this, or the public for that matter. Billy Rausch could have been court-martialed, and that would have been the end of his career, which was very, very important to him. Too many things are off after the Thursday when Vassy got hit. What happened to Maura was not in the plan, at least as far as Fred goes. This is a mess, but a little truth might show us where Maura is. If the entire event with Vassy has any merit, Fred may have been blindsided here, meaning he thinks he was protecting Maura, but meanwhile another person may have hit Vassy with the Saturn, therefore there's the compromise. Maura had to be silenced before this came out, and it ruined their life. Maura's was inconsequential at that point because Vassy was on the verge of death in a coma. By a sheer miracle, he lived months later, but at that time someone was expletive bricks that their life would be over. It put Maura in the crosshairs. Fred has no clue, at least on that scenario. Alright, let's get really crazy here. I mean, even crazier. So this was all in the news already on Thursday evening. And everyone was ignoring the alleged emails saying gone for a week. So some thoughts here. Either everyone thought she didn't write those emails, or how many times has a college kid skipped school? I've never seen local TV and large newspapers to care about any of that, especially with an excuse. Hey guys, I'm off for the week to go skiing, but feel free to ransack my room and belongings and put my actual absence in the paper on TV before I actually turn up back on campus. Because if she really did just come back, how would all this look? I mean, it is kind of weird. It's kind of weird. Again, how is this even a news story on Thursday the 12th? In those first few days, Fred was talking as if Maura ran away, and that if she just told him where she was, someone would come and pick her up, and they would work out whatever the issue was. I don't think Fred, Billy Rausch, Sharon thought that those emails were written by Maura, because someone in that group would have thought logically and waited a few days to see if Maura did turn up. No, the Billy Rausch entourage went full DEFCON mode right away. I highly doubt Bill Rausch called home Tuesday and told his parents to start making travel plans because Fred called him about the Saturn and didn't know much else. I think something was going on as early as Sunday the 8th. Other posts, I still suspect for some reason that law enforcement weren't necessarily searching for Maura near that scene, but the driver of the car. This may be why the police logs and their actions seem off. Also, the reason why no one can see Cecil Smith's photos of the accident and the mention of one set of footprints near the Saturn was maybe because those footprints were obviously a man's shoe print. And then, of course, there are the references in the dispatch logs, Butch Atwood saying he hit a pine tree. And I don't know if people are confused these days, but he, especially in 2004, referred to a male, not a female. And then, of course, man smoking a cigarette, getting in and out of the car. That was Faith Westman. Also, in the dispatch logs, which all of the coincidence theorists always ignore. So a man, especially in 2004, refers to a male, not a female. Then, of course, there was also the tall blonde spotted walking away from the accident scene that nobody wants to talk about. Again, I've gone over all of these inconsistencies. And, I mean, there's more evidence pointing to a male at the scene or a female that is not Maura than there is Maura, just based on all of the information available that we have. So I really don't know why all the coincidence theorists and all these goofs on all these sham subreddits, like the r/Maura Murray subreddit, they're all just going on and on as if Maura was at the scene when there's way more evidence that she wasn't. That's not even getting into the earlier accident. I mean, there's a lot of weird stuff going on. More posts here. I think you were the one who's... Okay, so why would law enforcement take photos of the scene of an abandoned vehicle unless they suspected a crime? Because when vehicles are abandoned, don't they usually just get towed after a certain period of time? Do law enforcement really take all these photos and police reports, especially in a hamlet in the middle of nowhere? I mean, it's kind of weird in 2004. Since Cecil did take photos of the Saturn that night, he might have gotten photos of any footprints around the vehicle as well. Maura was described in the initial posters as 5'7", 120 pounds, so I can't imagine her shoe size and footprints being all that large. I could definitely see a larger footprint sticking out to law enforcement, though. Perhaps this is why there was talk that Kathleen mentioned something about the type of shoes Maura wore. Maybe law enforcement discussed footprints with the family. I would think, too, that if footprints were indeed found near the Saturn, it would be easy to determine if Butch really did get out of his bus or not, and got near the Saturn. His various stories about what he did or didn't do that night seem to contradict one another. Another post here. Atwood was seemingly afraid of something. Afraid of what? A 20-year-old nurse? No. There was something off about the scene and the timeline, obviously. If it was some Army-connected issue, then we have Cecil, ex-20-year Army intelligence officer, and a connection to the unknown driver and male on the scene. It seems that someone was extracted from the scene, and then the scene was processed as the alleged DWI walkaway story. Neighbors all acted odd when questioned, even changing details of their stories. Perhaps because it had to fit the story of a young college student and nothing else. Has the Army also been implicit since day one, with knowledge that could lead to criminal charges or further investigation? There hasn't been any backing or support from the Army itself on anything with this case. Could they push a shutdown also towards the state? Wow, we're really going into Mindshock territory here, and it's only getting even more mind-shocking. Not to go down another rabbit hole, but it appears that Cecil Smith was very well educated and spent 20 years in Army intelligence. He was also said to be fluent in both Chinese and Spanish. Impressive. I wouldn't be surprised if there is some high-level Army connections to this case. Speaking of, I bet UMass doesn't get many West Point chemical engineering major transfers into their nursing program. I'd absolutely love to know just when Maura started working for UMPD at the security desk. She couldn't miss nursing clinicals and had to maintain high grades in the program, but apparently she could get busted on campus in a sting op run by Amherst PD, and that was okay. Huh. Right, another great point. My stepdaughter did a nursing program and it's insane. Not your regular get expletive-faced every day and party kind of program. Maura was doing well and probably had to leave track because of its schedule and homework. But they do not mess around when it comes to doing clinicals. Basically no excuses but death in the family. There were always 12-hour shifts the nurses had to fulfill. How did this fit in with working a campus security job? Almost unbelievable. And even Kate Markopoulos and even Karen Mayotte said Maura had her nurse books on the job to study. That doesn't sound like someone who didn't want to do it anymore. And that's not even getting into her job at the art gallery. Just yet another job. I mean, this is crazy. None of it lines up except for somebody needing to silence her, and it seems to be stemming from the last 4 to 5 days before she vanished. Another post, even when Maura was on the UMass track team for the 02 year, it certainly wasn't any small feat to be excelling in a demanding college track program and a demanding nursing program. I bet there weren't many nursing students who also competed athletically given the time consumption and demands of both programs. It makes the whole Maura was a DWI runaway narrative all the more questionable. Certainly, anyone can make mistakes, but nobody in Maura's circle has ever said she was irresponsible when it came to drinking. It sounds like she was like any other college student who partied with friends. Drinking while driving in the literal sense sounds like someone with a legitimate issue. I bet most people who got pulled over for a suspected DWI don't have the alcohol with them. Right. And even when Sharon seemed to be dissing Maura about having Bailey's and Mike's Hard Lemonade, both very minor, she even said Maura wasn't a drinker or alcoholic. That story doesn't fit, but it's been forced down people's throats since day one. Circling back to the UMass response and all the newspaper articles, the week wasn't even up and they are going through her computer, letting God knows who in her room, her sister, her boyfriend, by Friday, telling all her nursing classmates that she's gone forever, and providing counselor support in case someone has a problem with that. What if she just left the supposed junk Saturn on the road, took off skiing, and returned on Sunday? What made UMass so sure she wasn't coming back? And that's another excellent question. How often, after somebody goes missing, is there immediate grief counseling within 2-3 days? Isn't it usually like at least a week or two when they're fairly certain the person isn't coming back? I mean, it's kind of weird. It's kind of weird. A follow-up post, this is key. No one, allegedly, had any idea what was going on with Maura or what had happened beyond a car on the road. It's ridiculous to view the actions and non-actions of everyone here based on what they knew at that time. The hysteria seemed more on UMPD while going through her things in her room and getting on her computer right away. They must have had something nefarious in their heads to do all that. Baffling. So 2 options here. If there is some kind of UMPD corruption, then they know exactly what the deal is and they're covering it up. Or if they're legitimate and non-corrupt, at least in this instance, maybe they found something on her computer. Or someone told them something that hasn't been revealed yet. Or they knew exactly who was staying in the dorm room, but they haven't said. And based on that information, that's what caused them to pursue all of these actions, which they might have shared with other agencies. You know what else is curious? UMPD must have informed law enforcement in New Hampshire about the hit-and-run possible impending murder, or at least vehicular manslaughter at minimum, of Vassie and Amherst, and what a coincidence that a UMass student is in a different state on Monday with a wrecked car. They may have, but even New Hampshire State Police have never compared the Saturn or Maura with even being slightly associated with the Vassie hit, which is quite bizarre and not very good police investigating. If they never considered a UMass campus hit and run in a UMass car found hours away within days of the crime having front end damage. And that's a good point. And if none other than Alden Olson, who claimed that a mechanic had inspected both the Fred's Corolla at the Hadley accident and Maura's Saturn, in which case there are law enforcement connections and they were clearly aware of this. So again, they haven't made that public, but who knows what's going on behind the scenes, and who knows if Alden Olson might be onto something there. So let's get specific on Billy Rausch's leave form. So apparently he posted this a year ago or so. Military record request results. I received my OMPF. There are 0 DA31s in the file dating back to 2000. Also 0 docs from February 2004. Special thanks to the folks who helped with the request and those who reviewed the file with me. PDF request notification from the Defense Personnel Records Information Retrieval System, DPRIS. That is weird. So here is the discussion regarding this, which he posted on Reddit. Sharon, why did she need to call the Red Cross again? If she didn't, would Billy Rausch have been denied leave? What was Sharon's role here? If it's not emergency leave, why does Sharon need to be involved? If Billy Rausch filled out some official paperwork for leave, why were commanding officers surprised to see him on CNN per his own words days later? Leaving base without senior officers knowing, how does that even happen? And then let's not forget, in Billy Rausch's interview that we went over before and logically analyzed, he admitted to going to England without even informing anybody, which is technically not allowed. And he had a little laugh about that, which is curious. But continuing on here, Billy Rausch Sr.'s thoughts would like to hear his version of events. We've sure heard Sharon's. Julie claims that when her father, Fred, called her about her sister's Maura's disappearance, she was told to stay put until he went to New Hampshire to find out what was going on. Why was she told to stay put, but Billy Rausch, a long-distance boyfriend, got to Haverhill, New Hampshire the next day? Yeah. Further points. Let's go to Sharon first. For the longest time, everyone believed Bill Rausch got emergency leave until smart people questioning why over a DWI walkaway and a long-distance girlfriend. Then it changed to a regular pass/leave with a base commander's permission, but Sharon is calling the Red Cross that same evening, and even Billy Rausch calls the Red Cross in Ohio early Wednesday morning, call number 456, at 5:34 a.m. The Red Cross certainly does not get involved with regular leave for regular reasons. I still do not know how local New Hampshire law enforcement told them it was the Red Cross on the whimper call so early, but the Rausch family denies they could know. Very weird. It almost seems that the Army seeing Billy Rausch on CNN was a surprise. Like, what the hell is he doing? That may be because he had already been granted regular leave, then the Army extended it with verification of a girlfriend missing because Bill Rausch was already in New Hampshire. If Bill Rausch only did calls with his commanders Tuesday evening, would they know where he actually was when he called? Sure, he is expected to be on base, but has that been proven? Someone wrote that their SO used to get off base all the time and people would cover for him. I'm sure it's not like the days of the draft. Bill Rausch Sr. has never been seen on camera, let alone speak at all ever. Not that he has to, but I'm still curious if Julie stayed away because Bill Rausch and his family were already there. She coincidentally arrives the day Bill Rausch leaves forever. If they had done anything, what would Julie be doing at that time? The whole story is BS. Bill Rausch gets a call from Fred, his long-distance girlfriend's father, about some junk car being abandoned in another state, and we're supposed to believe he jetted to New England the next day over that, along with his parents and former college professor at West Point and his spouse. Oh, man. How is this scenario even remotely believable? And some posters are saying, I don't buy it. Sorry. So let's go through some more mind shocks here. Didn't Maura, or whoever had Maura's phone, call Bill Rausch's commanding officer's office after regular hours? I always thought that was odd. Was it Bill Rausch playing tricks to get her to talk to him, or something else? One thing I remember Julie said she did was to visit the accident site around 7:30 p.m. to see what it was like and what she felt Maura would do. She said it was pitch black and didn't think that she would run into the woods. Also curious. So let's go back to that Army commander from Maura's cell. Friday, February 6th, 9:53 p.m. Billy calls Maura, speaks to her for 8 minutes. Immediately after, Maura calls 580-442-1261, a number for the Commander Executive's office at Fort Sill, Field Artillery Brigade, and Deputy Commanding Officer, where Billy is working at Fort Sill. After that phone call, Billy calls 580-355-4475, which, according to listings online, is that number for Fort Sill's temporary lodging and billing and a Holiday Inn. The online listing for that number also includes a link to IHG Army hotel reservations, which use branded hotels for soldier-related lodgings. Incidentally, one of Billy's first calls after Fred Murray told him Maura had disappeared was to the only IHG hotel in North Conway, New Hampshire. Wow. Okay. I mean, what does everybody make of this sequence of events starting on Friday, February 6th? So this is, again, right before Valentine's Day. Not too long before Valentine's Day, the week before. Billy calls the Holiday Inn Tuesday evening after getting the call from Fred. He didn't try to reach Maura for 1.5 hours after hearing about the Saturn. What if, hypothetical, Billy Rausch was making plans for a stay at the Holiday Inn in New Hampshire for him and Maura? Possibly reservations to be coming soon. Was Billy Rausch calling Tuesday to cancel any reservations he was setting up? It was coming up on Valentine's Day. Did he do this on purpose to offset any questions about him already planning to come see her? How would people react if Maura was missing but knowing that the boyfriend was coming anyways? Would it change their perspective about things? He called right after hearing about the Saturn, but before trying to reach Maura. But he can't remember why. You're in Oklahoma calling a Holiday Inn in New Hampshire just after hearing from your dad, from your girlfriend's dad, that her car was abandoned 24 hours earlier with no contact from her. Maybe Holiday Inn had a discount plan through the Army or Red Cross to stay out, or he called them to see if Maura had booked a room or who was staying there, or he called to cancel any room reservations before that info popped up on law enforcement radar. Law enforcement must have caught this when they saw the phone records. I hope they followed up on it. Billy Rausch's explanations should be discounted. He just seems to be focused on confusion and obfuscation of the real facts, and there are others helping him do this. Whatever law enforcement gathered probably amounted to nothing in the big scheme of things. When Billy Rausch arrived the next day, it was literally an abandoned car with zero signs of a crime. Seriously nothing, except no driver found or returned to retrieve the car. However, what should have raised law enforcement's awareness is his response to this abandoned car. He got leave from the Army, and allegedly his parents drove 10 hours to get there as soon as possible. Police must have wondered about all of this activity over an abandoned car. It would make no sense for anyone to do that without at least going on something or hearing back from her. I would assume most people would give it some time, then say, if we don't hear from Maura by the end of the week, then we will get there. Maura wasn't a 5-year-old kid. There could be all kinds of info that law enforcement haven't released. I mean, they may know that Bill Rausch was with Maura at the liquor store shop, for example. Not a crime. They can ask all day long, but not a crime. Maybe Billy Rausch was at UMass that weekend. That's not a crime. This is another big reason that I don't feel Maura was harmed in New Hampshire at the car, because there's nothing there. Police even gave Fred his car back. Nothing. Not a crime scene. If there was a crime scene, I'll guarantee it was hundreds and hundreds of miles away from Haverhill, New Hampshire. Billy Rausch went on Reddit, got a copy of all his files, and reported here to Reddit that he had 0 DA-31 Army leave forms on his file. For many years, it was debated how he could get any emergency leave for someone not in his immediate family or spouse, as Maura was a long-distance girlfriend. It's possible that using the engaged to be engaged helped in getting approval from his Fort Sill commander to go to New Hampshire. It was cleared up in recent times when Billy Rausch admitted he was not on emergency leave, but regular vacation days that he had to be approved for, and was in the hole to actually take, and had to be made up over time. He states here with his own evidence that there were no DA-31 forms at all in his file dating all the way back to 2000. So what's kind of weird is all these years he couldn't clear this up. I mean, this is kind of weird. I mean, he's just a master obfuscator? Or is it possible he has some kind of mental condition and he's actually trying to be honest and helpful, but he can't because he's got blackouts in his memory? What kind of psychological operations training did he undergo? Was it similar to MK Ultra, where it might have left some holes in his brain and he can't remember things and he's trying to be helpful but he genuinely can't, and it's coming off as obfuscation but it's not actually intentional obfuscation? Is that an explanation? I don't know. That's weird. Even though Maura's disappearance prompted him to schmooze the Army to allow him to go to New Hampshire and extend his stay once he was seen on CNN the following week by Army commanders, it still seems odd that there were 0 files of any forms of leave in his entire history. Yet, while he was stationed overseas in Iraq, his sister in Ohio committed suicide in their family home, RIP. This event would be completely valid for emergency leave through the Red Cross, etc. Billy Rausch would have been allowed to fly home to Ohio for this in April 2007, then came back to Fort Sill September that year, then left the Army for good in December 2007. Here are his comments on that event. Billy Rausch. While I often think about my friends and military members who didn't come home, there is one death that took place while I was over there that I think about every day. My oldest sister, Heather. It was April 20th, 2007, and my roommate and I were asleep. The chief of my task force woke us both up knocking on the door, and when I answered, I could tell by the look on his face that something was wrong. He told me something had happened back home as he handed me an Iraqi cell phone. My father spoke with me on the phone with a tone of voice I'd never heard before. He proceeded to tell me that my oldest sister died by suicide. And that is, of course, very tragic. This would be a very appropriate time to use e-leave over a close family member's death, but if there was nothing in his file at all, does that mean Billy Rausch did not use emergency leave to go home to Ohio over his sister's suicide? But he did take unapproved leave for a long weekend to fly to England to meet up with his future wife-to-be before exiting out of the Army. Just questions. Another possibility, were his files just completely scrubbed so that there's no records of anything, and that's why that looks like that? I don't know. Some further astute posts here. When Bill was on Aaron Larkin's podcast, bonus episode Bill Rausch, around the 10:19 mark, Bill says, Mom was working on a Red Cross message which is required to leave. Something we had some experiences with because while I was at West Point, there were some deaths in the family, so Mom knew that process well. But if this is regular leave, why would they need that anyway? But anyway, Bill had an aunt who passed away while he was at West Point in the fall of '98, but as we all now know, an aunt doesn't make the cut for emergency leave. Immediate family only unless the person with the emergency is the military member's only living blood relative, or serves as in loco parentis. In the West Point Parent Handbook, it states the following, quote, in the event of a family emergency, TACs may approve leave requests that meet the criteria for Army emergency leave status, death of a parent, in loco parentis, or immediate family member. Passes may be granted for situations that do not meet the criteria for Army emergency leave by the regimental tactical officer after approval from the TAC. Neither of these situations count against the cadet's baseline passes for the semester. In addition, if there has been a death in the family, please contact the Red Cross. The Red Cross helps with the verification in order for the chain of command to make a decision regarding emergency leave. So did Bill Rausch apply for emergency leave but didn't get it and then used regular leave? Is that what happened? Again, I don't know. These are weird. It seems like passes are granted in situations that don't qualify for emergency leave, similar to how advanced leave may be granted after the military member is stationed elsewhere. Either way, the Rausches are calling up the Red Cross regardless of whether an event meets the qualifications. It seems like that's what they've been told to do so that the ARC can get the information to the people that grant decisions on leave, what type of leave, and it goes from there. So if they're well versed in the process and it has to do with extended family and Maura, wouldn't they absolutely do it with Bill's sister? Then I found this, military.com/spouse/military-benefits/military-family-emergency-leave.html. Quote, in our experience, the types of events that warrant emergency leave depend on whether the service member is already at home. For example, if a service member is not deployed, he might be given leave from his home duty station to visit a very sick family member, but if he is deployed and must be sent stateside for the emergency, the leave might be denied. End quote. I hope he argued with them over the importance of going home for his sister's funeral as much as he argued over bolting to New Hampshire for what looked like a DWI walkaway. Okay, follow-up posts. I remember that line about something we had some experiences with because when I was at West Point, there were deaths in the family, so mom knew that process well. Yet he pulls out his files and specifically states that the Army had 0 DA 31 forms on his record back to 2000. While at West Point at the same time, he graduated late 2002. What gives? Is this some kind of psyop? His job was literally that in the Army, psychological operations. Could the Army, in order to use his talent, have wiped all of his leave forms from view to protect his status or comings and goings? Is this a thing? Question mark. I would assume it's a thing for top secret or classified clandestine operations. It might not be a thing for some kind of baseline workers. I don't know. Further posts here. I'm just going to speculate for a minute and throw some stuff out there. I'm sure I'm taking what Bill is saying in the interview far too literally, but for the sake of discussion. In this interview, Bill says Fred tells him what happened and says that he's going to New Hampshire, and Bill says that he replies, "I'll be there soon." Bill could not have known that he'd actually get approved, right? He might have known that he'd argue about it, and he might have just assumed he'd get it, but to just confidently say, "I'll be there soon." And maybe that part just makes for a more interesting story, but then, well, and yeah, he says, "I'll be there soon" because a junk car that Maura hasn't been using in a month or more was found in New Hampshire. I mean, that is kind of weird. It's not like this was even a car that Maura was using or in Maura's name and being on the insurance, which Fred said he took her off the insurance. So wouldn't it even, but again, we still haven't had anybody come up with a situation where the parents of a girlfriend or boyfriend dropped everything and got a former college professor and his spouse to drop their jobs as well and just come look for a junk car that someone wasn't even using that was found in another state. I mean, that is kind of weird. Even if it was her car that she was using, and let's say it was her in her name, she had insurance, and it was a reliable vehicle, even in that situation, do we have any examples of this occurring? Okay, but let's continue here. Bill says he hangs up the phone, immediately walks into his commander's office, but his commander is not there. Quote, "So I spoke with the first sergeant, and for the rest of the night, that was the conversation." End quote. Bill doesn't actually say that he talked to anyone in person. The one person that he makes it a point to say that he walked into their office just so happened to not be there. Later in the interview, he says, quote, "When I finally got a hold of my battery commander, I got a hold of him on the phone," end quote. When he escalates the issues, it's still on the phone by his own account. Bill says he gets online, finds a flight from OKC to Hartford for the next morning, and then books the flight. If he's remembering and reporting these events in the right order, he booked the flight before he ever had final approval to leave. I will never get over that he asked his friend to take him to the airport. Why? In this bizarro land case, that's maybe the single most bizarre thing to me, and maybe it's because my mind is just broken at this point, but why ask someone else to drive you for over 1 hour one way to an airport when you have a car? It doesn't appear he's strapped for cash, so paying for gas parking isn't an issue. Where is his car? Someone is going to have to come back to the airport to pick him up. His flight was so early. That other person would have had to take him at like 4 a.m. I honestly might cover for my friend who was accused of murder before I drove them over an hour to the airport at 4 a.m. on a weekday. I mean, again, we don't know the situation. I mean, if Billy Rausch is really upset and this is a really good friend of his that maybe owes him a favor, maybe Billy Rausch called in that favor. I don't know. To me, that's the least strange thing about all of these oddities that are extremely strange. Like you mentioned, he did say he went back to base to sign out. I do believe he was living off base at the time with a roommate that I don't believe was on his list of people that could vouch for him, but his roommate may have been deployed. But I know from personal experience that service members are not always required to be physically present to sign out. It may even be able to be done online now, but back in the early 2000s, not far from the same time, at one base at least, you were allowed to call and check out. Last point, I'm not sure about 2004, but the military, at least now, lets you carry over earned leave time from one fiscal year to another. Here's what I found that I think is interesting. As part of the military pay and benefits package, military service members earn 30 days of paid leave per year. You start at 0, and for every month of military service, 2.5 days of leave gets added to your leave account. It doesn't stop, but the most you can carry over from one fiscal year to the next fiscal year is 60 days, except in certain very limited situations where you can carry over more. Service members are expected to use leave for any workday that they will not be available for work as required by their command. They are also expected to use leave for any day that they leave the vicinity of their duty station as defined by their command. Bill's date of entry for service is 12/20/2002. If leave and all that cuts at the end of the fiscal year, I would bet that the 2.5 days of leave are added at the beginning of the month. Bill was 0 leave on February 10th, 2004. Thoughts? ? And some interesting thoughts we do have. Some posts here. That would be an interesting time for him to arrive on the scene, right around the time of a party that no one can remember, but who the only 2 remaining confirmed guests he calls multiple times following Maura's disappearance and who may be under a gag order from a grand jury. Right before Maura crashes her dad's car. Not long before, there's a phone call from Fred's phone to Bill and then Bill's phone to Fred, where Bill said at least once that Maura didn't tell him about the accident, but then at least once that she did tell him about the accident. Interesting. Yeah. Another post here. I think now it's a cover story. One would have to assume by looking at his cell records for Monday, the evening of the Saturn being found, yet no one knew anything that he knew. He knew from some reason, and one of the reasons was that he was in New England at the time. There are spaces in his cell records for flights to have taken place. Now, of course, it's very brazen if he was to be caught already here when Maura vanishes, but it would actually fit. He already had the time away. He needed to beg for more. This is key. He never said anywhere where he met with his commanders face to face. He's calling them to be granted more time, or because they wouldn't know or care where he was at. He possibly used the engaged to be engaged tactic or other things unknown to them to be granted extra time. I'm sure the escapades of 2 young people in a long-distance relationship are the last points on his commander's mind. He has a buddy as an alibi for the ride. Oh, he probably did get a ride to the airport, but not when we think. Even so, law enforcement may even know this, but still have nothing of a crime to stick to him. They have a one-party intercept on file. In New Hampshire, it's severely illegal to have and can't be used in court as evidence. If a person turned this in, which is most likely, as cops can record with a wire, then it's damning. But again, can't be used. It could be a call between Billy Rausch and Kate, saying he landed on Monday afternoon. Still, not a crime. Law enforcement has their hands tied. The car, and I'll say this again, was to be ditched far away to muddy the waters, and it has. How it got there doesn't matter. As long as the no-crime vehicle is found hundreds of miles where a crime may have happened, it has worked. Another post. Okay, this may sound whack. We positively know that Billy Rausch flew to England without permission from the Army base Fort Sill. Not drove an hour off base to a strip club for a few hours. Flew to England for a long weekend, so 3 to 4 days, as evidenced in his own words. Is it possible he flew to New England on Sunday, February 8th? The flurry of calls Monday were to cover his ass with some buddies. I mean, seriously, now we know he only made calls with commanders to get leave. He was not face-to-face with anyone that evening. The flights don't exist because they weren't when we expect them. There is a call Monday at about 2:18 p.m. that appears to be in the same time zone, possibly incoming from Maura's cell. Someone checked her voicemail at 4:37, then must have destroyed it forever. What was happening exactly during that Monday afternoon? Billy Rausch calls McDonald for an entire 34 minutes when the Saturn was at that weathered barn corner. But both said Maura was not discussed at all. Faith, man smoking cigarette. Butch Atwood, he hit a pine tree. Cecil Smith, This whole thing is Bill's fault. Here's another interesting post. I'm being fantastical, but if you had two people that needed to prove they were not present at an event at a certain time in an area with no cell phone service, wouldn't it be smart if someone had both of their phones and used one phone to call the other? Leave the call connected for a long enough time to one guy to dump the car and the other guy to pick him up and get the hell out of there. Especially, and there was a response here, especially someone specializing in geospatial military anti-terrorism operations. More posts here. Lots of people make a big deal of how difficult it would have been for Billy Rausch to go off base and how there would have had to have been leave forms, etc. But didn't he and Maura go to a Duke basketball game in New York December 18th, 2003? That was a Saturday, so maybe he had the weekends off or hadn't run out of leave yet, but he was obviously free to travel to some extent. Follow-up post, yes, although I think weekend passes weren't the same as leave. And he also flew to New York with his mom to do one of the early TV shows for interviews, in the middle of the week, but for a few days. He even mentioned taking leave for other family deaths, even back in West Point, and he said his mother handled those, and then his unapproved flight to England was a 4-day weekend, I believe, also. But is it bizarre his alleged files contained 0 DA-31 forms back to 2000, which are required for any leave, whether emergency leave or not? Could the Army have wiped them clean if he is a special agent or something? Seems very odd. So here's the description on the DA Form 31. Request an authority for leave is a form necessary for requesting permission for temporary leave. This form can be used to request an emergency leave, a vacation, travel, or an extended pass. A fillable DA-31 is used by U.S. Army members to request leave from their post. It is also known as a request an authority for leave. Generally, a fillable DA-31 is used when someone wishes to use some of their vacation leave or must attend to a family emergency. So apparently he has 0 of any kind of leave going back to the year 2000. Nothing to see here, right? Nothing to see here at all. So here's the last thing we're going to go over in attempting to track Billy Rausch's constantly conflicting statements. So how long was he actually in New Hampshire? So these are some of his tweets, September 25th, 2018. If you know Fred, I'm sure he told you the Army granted me emergency leave to search for Maura by his side for weeks after she disappeared. We searched together, we did interviews together, and September 12th, 2018, if someone would have told me I would be accused of murder during the 4 tireless weeks we spent searching for Maura, I would have laughed in their face. February 24th, 2019, I spoke and worked with police every day during the month the Army released me to help search for Maura in 2004. So he's saying 4 weeks in a month, 2018, 2019, but apparently it was originally just 10 days. So, New Hampshire Union Leader, February 20th, 2004. Her son must depart back for duty in Oklahoma tomorrow, she said, and other family members who have put their lives on hold must also return to their homes. Patriot Ledger, February 21st, 2004. Leave is up for Maura Murray's boyfriend, Army Lieutenant Bill Rausch of Oklahoma, who is heading back to his military post. This is February 21st. Maura Murray's father, Frederick, and her brothers and sisters are still handing out flyers in Vermont and New Hampshire. Interesting. So apparently he left the 21st or 22nd heading back. So posters here. I have in my notes, Fred left around the same time but then maybe came back. There was an article published February 27, 2004 that said, eventually life continues, bills need to be paid, and last weekend Fred Murray had to get back home. This is also when he stopped by UMass and filed his statement with them and saw Maura's dorm room. Other family checked out of the Wells River Motel around March 2nd, and we know Fred came back on weekends for a long time, but there's no other mention of Bill being there that I can find. In another comment, you mentioned the phone bill, and I was thinking the same thing, but when I pull it back up and look at it, the invoice period is from January 23rd to February 22nd. The last call it shows for February 22nd, right before the roaming section, is to a Homestead Studio Suites in Huntington, Connecticut. Did he reserve a room and then go to Huntington? Interesting, though. Bob McDonald in April 2018, on his post on James Renner's blog, stated this: "We went to UMass on my last night up there to meet with campus police and also to get me a car rental so I could drive myself home. I hated to leave. Bill stayed up there for a while longer." So I'm assuming McDonald means Thursday the 19th, as there are 2 calls to an Avis car rental on Billy Rausch's phone records for that afternoon. This begs the questions. If McDonald had to be dropped off to rent a vehicle to get back to New York, what was Bill Rausch driving? If Bill Rausch, according to McDonald, stayed up there for a while longer, how long did he stay and where? Because according to these other articles, at the time of, he was leaving the 21st or 22nd of February. But was this a manufactured narrative in play by 2018 that Billy Rausch had stayed up there for a whole month? Or was Bill Rausch some kind of MK Ultra test subject and he honestly can't remember how long he was up there? Couple more interesting posts here. I still wonder how everything would have played out if none of the Rausches or his entourage had dropped a pencil on this whole thing. It's why I believe it's possible he may have been here already, only because how it would look to law enforcement if Bill was in New Hampshire or Massachusetts area, then left after the Saturn was found. I think he had to get leave to stay, or it would have looked really terrible. If he was at Fort Sill and didn't lift a finger, then he would just be an insensitive ass. Bill Rausch could have easily played "I'm in the military 1,500 miles away in Oklahoma" card. Heck, he could have even said, "I'll try to get there, but probably can't because getting leave is going to be tough." It sure as heck would have been more understandable if he never made it to New Hampshire and played on one of those excuses. Instead, the dude not only drove straight into the situation, he brought both his parents and the McDonalds along for the ride. Another post, plus he told Fred very definitively, "I'll be there soon," without having a clue if he would be allowed to get leave. But he could say he would be there if he was already there. It is very possible that Billy Rausch told local law enforcement that he was in town that weekend and was going to head back to the Army, but heard of Maura's car being located. One article said Billy Rausch had to fly back to Massachusetts. This may be why local law enforcement questioned him more seriously Wednesday evening once he waited for his parents to be with him. Important to note, Bill Rausch did not lawyer up upon arriving, but waited to meet with law enforcement until his parents could join him. Then, we also know that Sharon had worked for a lawyer's office for 17 years. Was his own mother technically acting as his defense? Her note-taking was insane. Back to my other thought, did law enforcement treat him more as a suspect because they knew he had been in town? There was zero reason to question Bill Rausch if he was 1,700 miles away over a DWI walkaway in an abandoned car. Yeah, if he even admitted to them, or someone else did, that he was at UMass or somewhere in the vicinity, then of course they would look at the boyfriend as the number one suspect. That's what's in line with all statistics of a female being met with foul play, if there was foul play. One more point regarding flyers. So basically, 2 days, wow. So in the 17 magazine article, which was published May 2004, there's a quote here: 2 days after Maura's disappearance, so this is the Wednesday, dogs had tracked her scent to the road about 100 yards away from the site. Her family thought that maybe someone had picked Maura up, so they printed up 15,000 flyers with her picture, and a crew of volunteers began tacking them to every signpost and gas station within 50 miles. There's also a news report video from either February 13th or 14th that shows the first flyers that were printed and overnighted from Ohio, so who knows how much that cost. But then there's another flyer which is a more generic flyer. So there's a few different flyers here. The color flyer states Maura was last seen wearing jeans and a dark coat, which I'm guessing was the description that Butch gave law enforcement, since those would have been printed prior to Christine McDonald's interview with Butch and before law enforcement questioned Forcier. Strange that the dark coat description started so early and has stuck around so long, considering we're now supposedly seeing the ATM stills and she's not wearing a dark coat in those. So a couple of responses here. They printed up 15,000 flyers the first week, possibly within 2 days. So Fred only made it up to New Hampshire on Wednesday. I don't see how anyone determined Maura was a missing person so quickly. Maybe by the following week, but I don't see why that would be happening those first few days. And again, if Maura simply just showed up let's say that Saturday or that Sunday, not even a full week, and there's already 15,000 flyers at every gas station, I mean, it's kind of weird. Or even, let's say she showed up, if they had the flyers on Wednesday and she showed up on, let's say, Thursday. So, I mean, would that be kind of weird? I don't know. Another post here. This is so royally expletive up. This is all putting in perspective things like the poster and the info being put on that poster before others chimed in. Interesting. I was a printer for over 25 years, and 15,000 flyers printed in 2004 would have cost thousands of dollars, plural. Like people say, if Maura popped up a few days after, who was footing the bill for all those flyers, especially for nothing? Another post, perspective is right. They are printing that many flyers on Wednesday. Didn't they just get there? His sister must have started working on them the minute they left. I assume this is the sister that died, so she can never be questioned. Since no one knew anything, if she turned up as she allegedly said in the emails at the end of the week, everyone had spent loads of money, time, and loss away from work. I mean, yeah, the McDonald's are getting off from work to go on this little trip and start interviewing neighbors over an abandoned junk car that Maura was supposedly not even driving. Yeah, I mean, it is kind of weird. If she came back to her dorm that weekend, multiple people had spent time walking miles through the woods, drove all over New England, stayed at hotels, food, gas, etc., and the thousands of dollars spent on flyers, and her dorm room ransacked and computer accounts gone through, this would account for lots of pissed off people. Would Maura herself be pissed off too? Because she could have just said, well, that's what I sent, if she was the one who sent the emails. She could have just said, well, yeah, I said I'd be back next week, and I just didn't want to talk to people because I was upset. If it was only a few days, I mean, if she came back that Thursday or Friday or whatever. Some more posts here. There was a time when I thought Bob McDonald left on Wednesday, probably because that's when he said he thought he left. But Thursday makes more sense for multiple reasons. If he and Bill went to UMass that day, that almost makes all the calls to Kate and Sarah a little bit more understandable. If Bill was in the area, maybe he was trying to get in touch with them to talk face-to-face. The Avis calls, although I have no idea why they drove all the way to Springfield to get a car rental, they had to have passed other rental places, even other Avis locations, before reaching Springfield from Amherst. Weird. I would assume that Bob and Bill road-tripped in Bill's parents' car, and then Bill drove that back to New Hampshire after dropping Bob off, but who knows? Nobody knows for sure when they were coming or going. If it was, and are there other missing persons cases where nobody knows where anybody is, what anybody is doing? Nothing can ever be verified. No flights can be verified. No car rental. I mean, this is really crazy. I mean, I really don't know what to make of this. If it was Thursday that McDonald left and he hated to leave, did he really have to get back by Friday? I mean, at that point, what's another day plus the weekend? Bill was maybe leaving that following weekend, the 21st or the 22nd anyway. Anyone's guess is as good as mine about what stayed up there for a while longer means. McDonald was overly generic in his response to James Renner. Bill basically didn't leave my side. There were times where he'd go off to the motel office to do phone interviews. Other than that, I don't remember us being apart. I think we can take his whole account of things about as seriously as we do Bill's, So basically, not at all. Another interesting post regarding the party, going back to Saturday night, Sarah is not of drinking age. How is she having a dorm party? Although I'm sure plenty of underage kids have dorm parties anyway, but still, 21-year-old Maura and Kate Markopoulos with wheels on a Saturday night are not going out? I find it hard to believe there was not another party. The track team has distanced themselves. No one knew where she'd been prior to the earlier term, and no one from the track team saw her Saturday night. You'd think Kate would want to party with them. Earlier on the story was Kate did not know Maura was missing until the following Saturday. Coach Julie said, paraphrasing, to not worry about the police on the bus, just tell them the truth, okay? The truth about what? Did these police go with them on the bus to the track meet too? Odd. Wait, what? I don't even remember that. So the police were on the... I'm assuming they couldn't have been going around to track meets with the track team. Could they have? Unless they suspected the track team of some kind of involvement. It seems more likely they just came on the bus to question people and then went off the bus, right? I mean, I don't know. This is kind of weird. Again, any other missing persons case, you'd have the coaches or former coaches all over media just getting more attention to the case. But not in this one. Definitely not in this one. Another post, I always thought the whole story about Kate joining Maura and her dad for drinks at Amherst Brew was a little off. It's like, why would Kate want to go drinking with Maura and her dad on Saturday night when they were just going to end up partying back at UMass or off campus? Not trying to nitpick, but in the Oxygen show, Fred said that Maura bumped into Kate when they were out at dinner. In his statement to UMPD, however, he sounds pretty annoyed about having to pick up Kate. So this is from the statement. She got a call from Kate, who had just returned from a track meet. We went to a student parking lot and picked up Kate around 9 o'clock. I asked Maura to take me back to the Quality Inn. She instead had me pick up Kate, and we went back to the ABC to the upstairs. I asked to be brought back to the Quality Inn. They were going back to the dorm. I told them it was too late, but they said it doesn't get started until late. So again, I do remember picking apart this story for veracity. So Maura is with Fred at the ABC drinking. Then they leave. They go pick up Kate and then come back to the ABC and drink some more. Then they drop Fred off and then they go drink some more at one or more parties. I mean, I guess this is the narrative. I don't know. I really don't know. It's kind of weird. Continuing on with the comment here, I can't imagine Fred would have gotten hammered in front of Maura and one of her friends to the point where Maura would have had to drive him back to the hotel. Fred said he picked up Kate at the student lot, so I imagine he also drove her and Maura back with him to the ABC for drinks, and according to him, that was around 9 p.m. I don't get why Fred is being made to pick up Kate, and then after drinks, he's asking Maura to take him back to the hotel. Who paid for the wine at the liquor store after? I imagine Fred did, since he just said just to pick up something. Wouldn't this scenario have been much easier if Kate just waited at UMass until Maura finished dinner with her father and then dropped her back off, and he dropped her back off on campus? I mean, yeah. Earlier on, the story was Kate did not know Maura was missing until the following Saturday. Okay, what were Bill Rausch and Kate discussing Tuesday? All right, so let's get to the last posts here. So, Billy Rausch himself has stated on numerous occasions it was emergency leave, just like from this tweet on September 25th, 2018. If you know Fred, I'm sure he told you the Army granted me emergency leave. So, the post regarding this, everyone is missing the bigger anomaly here. Billy Rausch states himself it was emergency leave. How does a high-ranking official not know the difference between emergency leave and non-emergency leave? When pressed further, he stated it was an emergency leave, so why did Sharon contact the Red Cross over an abandoned car and a DWI walkaway? Other post here, if someone is telling the truth, their story doesn't change. Another post here, John Smith was the first by a long shot to show that many of the actions and words coming from the Billy Rausch camp were highly suspicious, especially the mere fact that none of them ever came back. More posts here. I wish we could hear Fred's version of events about his time spent side by side for 4 weeks straight with Billy Rausch. And also his thoughts, of course, on the McDonald's. Another post, like Judge Judy says, if you tell the truth, you don't have to remember. Billy Rausch doesn't seem to remember much about anything that happened in February 2004. If he was serious about spending the rest of his life with Maura, he would remember. Unless, of course, if there is some kind of brain damage from all the psychological operation experiments, maybe he's honest and he can't remember. I mean, it's a possibility. It's not like if he was in the military but not in psychological operations, I mean, it would still be a possibility, but it would be more remote, of course. There's also another tweet from September 12th, 2020. When leave was obtained, Tuesday night. When it started, immediately or Wednesday, I'm not 100% sure. What kind it was. Emergency. So he stated on numerous occasions that this was clearly emergency leave. But supposedly in his file, there's no record of any kind of leave. Emergency, regular, there's no leave. There's no records of any kind of leaves at all. What does everybody make of that? I don't get it. Another poster posted this. A more important question. I didn't think the Army left anyone behind. None of that entourage ever came back after the initial 10-day search ever again. Another post. This is where I honestly think there is some sort of secret that exists to this day between the Billy Rausch group and the Murrays. No way, in my opinion, he got his 2 middle-aged parents to drop what they were doing and wing it all the way to New England for almost 2 weeks and get the McDonald's from New York, too. Nope, never buying that over a DWI walk, run away. The whole time, Maura's own sister Julie was told by her father, her words, to stay put at Fort Bragg until Fred went up to New Hampshire to find out what was going on. So in this scenario, we have Bill Rausch, Fred, Kathleen, Tim Carpenter, Bill Rausch, Sharon, Bill Rausch Sr., the McDonald's in New Hampshire, while Julie gets told to stay put at Fort Bragg, and none of these people have a clue as to what happened to Maura. When Julie says someone knows something, I have to wonder who she's referring to. Few more astute posts here. I bet that is all the CO remembers too, 17 years later, is that when he saw Billy Rausch on TV and some kind of a leave was involved. He doesn't remember type of leave or dates, but some consider this an airtight alibi. Far from it, in my opinion. If Billy Rausch only had to call one of his COs to get leave and not meet in person, I don't see why Sharon would need to get involved and call the Red Cross. Billy Rausch could have been using his phone from anywhere to be calling his CO in Oklahoma, so I don't see how a call record would be considered an airtight alibi. Unless Bill Rausch was off on one of his unauthorized leaves, like when he went to England, and realized he was in deep expletive and had to get his mom to help him get out of it. New Hampshire Sunday News, October 28, 2007. That explanation doesn't make sense to Mrs. Rausch, who said she was working with the Red Cross on Billy's leave, and therefore any calls from the organization would have gone to her rather than to her son. I assume by working with the Red Cross that it took some effort on Sharon's part to get her son leave. I'd be interested to know just when she started working with the Red Cross. I wouldn't be surprised if she started calling the Red Cross on Sunday or Monday. And of course, we do not have the Rausch's landline records. That would be curious as well. There is something definitely off about this whole Red Cross thing. Billy Rausch ended up not getting emergency leave. So he would not even have to deal with the Red Cross. He should have known too that a girlfriend or supposed soon-to-be fiance does not qualify for emergency leave. I kind of sense he was already on leave, which may not have been authorized, possibly harassing Maura, and when she disappeared, which left him in a bad situation, so Mom had to figure out how to get him out of it. It looks like Billy Rausch may have already been around and had to stay longer in the area and begged his superiors over the phone, because if law enforcement knew he was already there, how expletive bizarre would it look if he headed back to Fort Sill once Fred called him about the Saturn on Tuesday? If true, it's no wonder law enforcement grilled him, because it would show he was around. The commanders have way bigger fish to fry than worry about anyone getting leave over their long-distance girlfriend. I'll bet none of them can remember any details about it at all. It's laughable to think they would. And yeah, there's a lot of people who think that Billy Rausch had an airtight alibi. I don't know why, but it's kind of weird. Here's another whoa. What? I have not read this article. This is October 29, 2007, New Hampshire Union Leader. For the next 2 weeks, both families believed Maura was alive, that she had broken into a cabin because she was a survivor, was in excellent health, and ran 5 miles a day, Rausch said. So that's what their main theory was, as reported in 2007? Yeah, I don't know what to make of that. I mean, there's so many bizarre oddities. Has anybody even nailed down Billy Rausch's flights? I mean, there's no records of airplane tickets or anything. It's kind of weird. It's kind of weird. Okay, I mean, we've been going for a while now, so we do have to wrap this up soon, but just I can't help but go through a couple more posts here on the Mindshock subreddit, because there's so many astute sleuths here that are coming up with different scenarios and trying to get explanations here that are just so curious. Here's another post. I've suspected for a while now that Billy Rausch might have been in New Hampshire before the later afternoon evening of Wednesday, February 11th. There was a flight that was scheduled to take off from Dallas-Fort Worth, American Airlines 1258, number 1258, at 12:49 p.m. Central Time, but didn't actually go wheels up until 1:24 p.m. Central Time. Bill has been on the phone pretty regularly up until that point, and after Maura called him and supposedly left a voicemail. He tries to call her back several times, but stops at 1:24 p.m. Central. Now there's an incoming call that shows 2:24 p.m., call number 340, and maybe that throws out this whole theory, but there's another explanation for it. It's billed as a 1-minute incoming call from another PCS number. If we ignore the 2:24 p.m. call for just a minute, the next phone activity of Bill's statement is a 5:10 p.m. call to voicemail, which is the exact time that the American Airlines flight number 1258 arrives at Bradley International Airport. 1:24 p.m. Central until 5:10 Eastern is the exact flight time, wheels up to wheels down, on the dot. It's so strange how, here we go again, with the exception of the 2:24 p.m. call, the other call times match up so perfectly. Is there any way that a 2:24 p.m. call could have still come through connected mid-flight? Could it be a weird time zone jump where he answers the call at 1:24 p.m. Central, but because the next time a tower connects or the phone is turned on, it's EST, so the time shows weird on the statement? I'm sure that I seem overly Bill Rausch did it, and that's not my intention. I don't even strongly think that. I am, however, almost certain that the information we're being given, have been given, is not accurate. I'd like to try and see what some alternatives to those narratives look like. Some more posts here. If Sharon claims Bill Rausch did indeed enter Maura's dorm with UMPD when he arrived in New England, I would think someone at UMass could have verified that. Could he have been at UMass, say, Tuesday, and that's why he was calling Kate? To my knowledge, Kate has never said what her and Bill Rausch discussed that afternoon, if they did talk. So if Bill Rausch was in New England by late afternoon Tuesday, wouldn't this be before Fred even told him she was missing? Fred didn't know until after he got out of work, maybe around 5. He went to New Hampshire the next day on Wednesday. I think it was on the Montel show that Billy Rausch slipped and said he got the whimpering phone call on the day after the accident in the airport, which would have been Tuesday. But don't his phone records discount this? The time zone changes confuse it even more. I think it was also on the CNN interview where Billy Rausch said he got the whimpering voicemail Tuesday as well. I don't understand why Bill Rausch would immediately go to UMass when he supposedly arrived Wednesday if Fred was telling him Maura was missing in New Hampshire. However, If he was in New England earlier, such as Tuesday, this makes sense. I think Billy Rausch knew if he was in the area and Maura turned up missing, he would need McDonald and him 34 minutes to figure out how to look on how to handle this. Law enforcement don't care either way, but would be questioning him. But would know the public had been lied to. Good point, and the entourage was set in motion right after the call with Bob McDonald. I believe he needed McDonald's help on how he should handle all of this. I'll bet my mortgage that he told Bill Rausch for all of them to go all in. It would look better down the road for Bill Rausch. The clue something was up is that this long call was at the time of the Saturn accident Monday evening. Everything was in motion. And is this the time to sync up those Echelon spy satellites? Because if people believe that Snowden has been correct about a lot of things, and NSA spying was in full effect, and you'd have to think if Bill Rausch is one of these guys that went on to work in psychological operations, would they just have his phone records and all recorded phone conversation easily on hand? Like they wouldn't even have to do digging like for just a regular non-military person? Is it possible there is a record of that entire call with McDonald somewhere in NSA archives? And when we're talking 2004 here, we're not talking like the 70s or the 80s, even though some believe there's recordings of those as well. If military tech is roughly 15 years ahead of civilian, who knows? But 2004 is not the 70s or 80s. It is very possible there are records of all these conversations, and even if you don't believe that the NSA spying is all over civilians, what about guys that are being primed for psychological operations? Would they be closely monitored and everything recorded? And Bob McDonald himself at West Point. Another post, both Tuesday and Wednesday have very early morning calls. I think the key is that call home Sunday afternoon and the 34-minute call to McDonald Monday evening. If I'm going with a Bill Rausch early arrival, I'm putting it at Sunday evening or Monday during the day. That would put him in the area for Maura's disappearance and make law enforcement very suspicious and why they would grill him Wednesday evening. That one news article sticks out when it said Bill Rausch got the call about the Saturn and had to fly back to Massachusetts. The thing is, though, if Billy Rausch is going to help Maura, so they had that phone conversation on Thursday evening. What if Maura informed him about the CI situation? Or maybe he already knew about the CI situation if there was one. And someone else used Maura's Saturn and she was freaking out about it. Would Bill Rausch, if he's the good guy in this scenario, would he consult McDonald and would he fly in to help Maura? If they really are, if the engaged to be engaged narrative is true, or at least in Bill Rausch's and Sharon Rausch's mind, maybe Maura wanted no part of it, but perhaps Billy Rausch really did want that, and he would do anything for Maura, in which case he would arrive and try to help her with the Saturn situation. It had to be alarming for Bill Rausch when he got the incoming call from Fred's phone early Sunday morning, February 8th. Even if it was Maura using her dad's cell, Billy Rausch had to be asking where the phone he gave Maura was at. However, I still leave open the possibility that it was actually Fred calling Bill Rausch for whatever reason. And then the 34-minute call to McDonald Monday evening, two grown men talking for over a half an hour, and Maura is supposedly not discussed. And yet the McDonalds drop what they were doing to head to New Hampshire a few days later. It's curious of that early call after Hadley. Everyone assumes Maura called Billy Rausch out of comfort, but I don't think so. I'll bet she called to tell him, leave me alone. Almost like taunting him, then she hung up on him. Then he calls that phone right back. Dunno. Seems very weird. Bill Rausch could have flew out Sunday day and arrived in town. He could have told law enforcement he came to visit, left for Ohio, then came right back when he heard about the Saturn. Why would anyone say they felt as dirty as Scott Peterson, the guy who allegedly murdered his pregnant spouse? And that's a big allegedly. Again, if you haven't checked out the Mindshock podcast on the Scott Peterson case, check that out. So let's reiterate a couple more posts here. Caledonian Record, February 27, 2004, regarding Sharon Rausch's testimony. She said Murray had called Bill February 8th and was crying because of the previous Saturday accident, though he didn't feel that was it. He told her on a scale of 1 to 10 it was only a 3 or 4, she said. He had to talk her a long time to calm her down. We are convinced something happened at school and her Amherst friends know. And again, if it was only a 3 or 4 on a 10 scale, why did he have to talk to her a long time to calm her down? I mean, I don't know. That's kind of weird, too. If Billy Rausch were to arrive in the New England area before Wednesday evening, that would mean that the call from Fred or Kathleen wasn't what prompted him to travel there, which is what I think would be interesting. Billy Rausch has confirmed that he did fly into Bradley Airport. His version of the story was that his parents picked him up there on Wednesday before going straight to the Haverhill Police Department. I've always kind of wondered why, if he did travel on Wednesday and his destination was the Haverhill area, he would choose to fly into Hartford instead of Burlington, Vermont. But maybe Burlington doesn't have as many incoming flights. The story about the voicemail has been all over the place. Bill Rausch did call the calling card number, Denver, Colorado, back early Wednesday morning, so I guess that would line up with the whimpering voicemail, but without knowing his intent behind calling the calling card number, and the fact that law enforcement dismissed it so quickly, it's hard to say. Bradley Airport in Connecticut is the closest to UMass. Billy Rausch, it seems, was headed to UMass, not New Hampshire. I think this fact is often overlooked. Other posts here, he could just come up with his tickets. He hasn't. Someone in that position would be posting them far and wide if he were innocent. They would be in the original documents, but they are not. It's time someone talks about someone knows something. Another interesting post, I just got off the phone with my friend who is a pilot and who is now probably a little concerned with my mental health. And he said that it was possible, especially in 2004, for a cell phone call to connect during a flight. He said that it's actually more likely for a call to have connected then than it would today, because cell phones and cell phone services in the early 2000s were analog instead of digital, which could sometimes mean that the reception for calls was stronger than versus now. I'll try to find more information. He's not an expert and neither am I, but it seems there's definitely a possibility. I mean, you'd have to have a degree in geospatial information science to figure this out. So, a lot of curiosities and unanswered questions like usual in the Maura Murray case. So, with Bill Rausch, again, is he the good guy here? Is he the good guy and is he just bad with memory? Was he trying to help Maura? And I guess if we're going down every rabbit hole, did he successfully help Maura? If Maura did run away to start a new life, how do we know Bill Rausch and McDonald aren't the ones that helped her do it? And maybe they helped her do it without telling anybody. Of course, there are far more nefarious theories. Everybody always wants to focus on Bill Rausch being guilty. And again, I have no clue what's true and what's not true. But he could very well be the good guy here. I've postulated that since day one. And we don't fall for logical fallacies here, so we're not going to fall for any. He could be the good guy. Hope you guys enjoyed another edition of Mindshock True Crime in the Maura Murray series. If you enjoy the podcast, you want to help support the podcast, keep awareness up in cold cases, missing persons cases, and wrongful convictions, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. You can also become a member right here on YouTube. And make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit that bell for notifications, like and share Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcaster requests. You can also be a guest on the podcast depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.